Hey folks, hope all's well. This here's a compilation of those Halohammer vids I made, for those of you who might like it all together for your enjoyment. As a quick announcement before I start, since I don't want to take up too much of your time, I've got some dice available for you to purchase now if such a thing interests you. Head on over to Orchid 8 if you'd like to throw around a pancreas. In the same way I gamble on medical supplies actually being approved in a timely manner, you too can gamble on making your saves with these fancy little things. But without any further ado, enjoy the next hour 50 of me enjoying one of my favorite hobbies. Forcing people that probably don't want to hear about Halo to hear about Halo. If you watch my channel and have functioning eyes or ears, a tall order I know, you're aware I like Warhammer 40k. I'll admit I don't like it as much as fantasy, so crucify me in the name of the Emperor if you must, but I like the setting a lot. But I have a confession to make. It's not the sci-fi setting I fanboy for the most. That distinction goes to Halo. And you know what? I haven't gushed over it nearly enough yet. So welcome to the closest thing I'm ever gonna do to a lore video. Probably. It's easy to say that now when I haven't yet run out of factions to analyze, but I digress. And I'll be honest, if you're the kind of Warhammer fan who gets conniptions over someone saying another faction in another universe could stand strong in the setting, you're gonna dislike this video. You're really gonna dislike this video. Also, don't read the Zeely sequence books. So in a mini-series of me showing my favoritism for my favorite sci-fi franchise, allow me to tell you why the Covenant would make a fantastic faction should they suddenly become a part of the 40k franchise.
On the blood of our fathers, on the blood of our sons, we swore to uphold the Covenant, even to our dying breath.
And before you say anything, yes, I'm aware this would never happen. This is just my wet dream of two franchises I love colliding. So for those of you who don't know much about Halo and the Covenant, first of all, shame on you. But the Covenant are a coalition of alien races brought together by a shared religion and the belief that an ancient race known as the Forerunners were gods. It is said that the Forerunners ascended onto a greater plane of existence via the Halo rings, leaving their stuff behind for their successors, who naturally were the Covenant, which is not at all what actually happened, but people believing in a false religion is nothing new to 40k. Remember how the Emperor said he wasn't a god and religion is wrong? How's that working out for him? Some are more zealous in this belief. The elites follow it pretty closely, the prophets are fanatics, and the jackals follow it because the other option is death for being pirates. Either way, they have the military might to keep everyone in check, so there's no staying on the path of heresy forever. Kind of like the Imperium again, actually. So with the important background said and done, why do I think they'd fit in? How do I think they'd fit in? Let's do how first, because it's quicker. The Covenant could fulfill the role of generic alien species. This isn't because I think the Covenant is inherently generic. Not at all, I fucking love the Covenant. But compare them to everyone in 40k. All the Xenos have a shtick. The Eldars are the various flavors of elf, the Orcs are, well, orcs. The Necrods are undead space Egyptians in space, who are also Terminators, a lot going on there. The Tyranids are a hive mind with a species-wide vor fetish. And even the Tau, who are supposedly non-magical and somewhat normal aliens, have a remarkable tendency towards scientific progress and general dynamism in responding to threats. And weeaboo robots. Can't forget those. But the Covenant? There's no space magic here. There's no intense focus on technology, although their tech is nothing to look down at that. We'll get to that. They would do a great job at contrasting how batshit insane everyone around them is by being relatively normal for a sci-fi setting. They're a collection of alien races that relentlessly attack humanity. That's their shtick as a whole, even if the individual races have more to them. In 40k, that's the default for almost every Xenos faction. I mean, hell, you'd almost want to join them over anyone else. Yeah, they hate human life, but who doesn't in 40k? Sure, they have a somewhat oppressive religion, but compare that to the Imperium, who have an incredibly oppressive religion. Sure, they don't have space magic, but in 40k, is that really a bad thing? Not having to worry about getting your asshole shredded by demons for the crime of thinking too hard? So that's how the Covenant could fit in. They could be the perfect race to highlight just how batshit insane 40k is by their comparative normalcy. Also, the names they use for their shit is absolutely the stuff you'd expect to see in 40k. Their calendar has a time period called the 23rd Age of Doubt. The ships are all named things like the Shadow of Intent or the Long Night of Solace. Perfect for the setting. Anyways, let's go to why I think they'd fit into 40k. First off, a pretty goddamn diverse amount of races. Tau think they have some good inclusion rates, but they don't have shit on the Covenant. You've got the elites, brutes, drones, grunts, hunters, prophets, jackals, and all the other flavors of jackal, engineers to fix your shit right up. Got a highly varied set of units to play if you were to put these guys on the tabletop. Grunts are the perfect line holders. Move over, Imperial Guard. It's lore accurate to say they breed like rabbits too. In fact, they're basically a middle ground between humanity and the orcs in terms of how quickly they fuck. And they're armed with some pretty powerful weapons for what they are. Whoever you are, you're gonna feel a fuel rod cannon to the face. As for the next unit, if you've played Halo 2 on Legendary, then you already know what the Boulevard of Jackal snipers is capable of. Galaxy's finest marksmen, these rat bastards. They've also got some cool energy hoplite shields for when you really need to get up close, so that's a nice bit of extra protection. Drones are great for making Master Chief want to kill himself, and they'd be great at that in a tabletop setting too. Some units with the fly keyword that would be great at harassing enemies. In fact, I think I just described swooping hawks, but buggier. You want something dead? You want that something to be a tank? These motherfuckers mean business. You do not want to be caught in front of one of them. You think you're safe from their fists, and then it shoots a plasma beam at you for 10 seconds straight. You think, alright, maybe I'll outrun it, and then it lunges 50 feet like it has the commando perk before smearing you across 3 dimensions. And of course, they come in pairs, and yes, when one dies, the other goes Super Saiyan. They're like the Hulk if the Hulk was made out of worms. But maybe you don't want the biological tank that is the hunter. Maybe you want the hairy orc that is the brute, able to take a hit and keep on going with nothing more than the power of monkey. I mean, if you've played Halo, they need no further explanation. Fuck, with the name Brute, they require no more explanation. They smack people good and hard and can take a smacking good and hard. And a gravity hammer is basically just a cooler thunder hammer anyway, so hey, they can already fit in perfectly. But maybe none of that's for you, and you want someone with some actual brains. Not a coward wearing a sailboat or a roided out chimpanzee, but a bona fide strategic mastermind, brave as all can be and with a brawn to back it up. Well, the Covenant still has you covered with the elites. Just ask the coolest cutscene in video games to date.
Pitmaster, they outnumber us 3-1.
Then it is an even fight.
Fucking love that cutscene. Master warriors, master strategists, and masters that given some wild head. Plus, they have their own unique honor code to honor valiant warriors and respect a worthy foe, which helps them fit into Warhammer while also having a better honor code than Warhammer ones, because they aren't fucking stupid. The elites see, remember that killing an enemy who can't see you instead of charging at him from a mile away screaming isn't dishonorable, it's just smart. Mentioning no coordinates. You've got the prophets and their fancy floating chairs too, can't forget them. Maybe not great in a fight, but they could certainly provide some morale and other kind of bonuses to their troops on the battlefield. And finally, for the last of the races that matter, we have the engineers. You know how Eldar bone singers just play some tunes and that Wraith Knight is magically healed? That's engineers, but they don't use prissy elf magic, they use their tentacle hentai arms. And they do it in seconds. Literally the perfect support unit, because if they get under attack, they can just float away. Like, alright bro, I'ma head out. Sure, they themselves can't attack, but when the scarab you brought down to 1 wound has full health all of a sudden, that's not gonna matter much, is it? Think it's just infantry they can square up with? Nope. They got vehicles. You want light vehicles? They're almost all skimmers, zoom across the battlefield like an Eldar. You want heavier stuff? A Locust isn't that far off from a Knight, especially in terms of size. You might think that the Covenant has no answer for when the Titans start shooting, and that's where you're stupid and wrong and I hate you. Look at the Scarab. And so you know I'm not making it up, here's the size comparison between the Warlord, Warhound, and Scarab. Yeah, fuck you, Imperial bitches. And they can make more Scarabs anytime they want, since it's not made by technology impossible to recreate. It's made by worms. As for their spaceships, let's run a comparison. The Apocalypse class battleship is roughly 12 kilometers long. The CSO Supercarrier is 29 kilometers long. Groovy. Want a bit smaller? Well, the CAS carrier is only 5 kilometers long, but it carries up to 40,000 troops. Not crew. Troops. It's also armed to the fucking teeth and has energy shields. Smaller Covenant spacecraft are still fearsome and are, of course, armed with the ubiquitous energy shields and plasma weapons. I could go on about the various weapons and shit they have, and believe me, there's a lot to go over, but you get the idea. I wanted to give everyone an idea for all the stuff they could have access to if they were given a position in Warhammer Tabletop somehow. Or indeed if that Halo Tabletop game wasn't shelled, but that's its own problem. There's one thing I want to address before I get on with the rest of the video. Their technology as a whole and what it's capable of doing. A lot of Warhammer fans have this opinion. Warhammer wins against other universes because it's Warhammer. I hate that opinion. When someone says it wins because it's 40k, I want to crush them for heresy. Their heresy against the Great Journey, that is. In addition to that, the Halo games honestly sell the Covenant short in terms of their tech. In the games, a grunt shoots you with the plasma pistol and you go, come here you little fucker, and turn him into a corpse. In the lore, a grunt shoots a marine with a plasma pistol and his torso melts off. The Covenant's level of technology is absolutely apeshit, but you wouldn't know that just playing the game. Every single one of their infantry has the option to grab a plasma weapon and go. You know, plasma, the thing in 40k that's close to the top tier of weaponry. Nearly all of the Covenant's weapons are plasma, and unlike 40k plasma weapons, it isn't a literal roll of the dice on whether or not it's gonna blow up. In Halo, when a plasma weapon overheats, you burn your hand, go, "Aw fuck," and then it cools down. In 40k, when a plasma weapon overheats, it takes the operator and everyone in a 10-foot radius with it. Whoopsie daisy. I'm pretty sure it's possible to overheat a Covenant weapon like that, but it'd be on purpose. You can bring up individual weapons that are more advanced than what the Covenant has, and you'd be right. There are certain weapons that can outtech what the Covenant has. I mean, the Prophets never played Pokemon with God, for one. But compare the humble lasgun to faction-wide plasma weaponry, and hopefully you'll begin to see why I think the Covenant can stand proud in 40k. You might wonder that they're so advanced, how come they didn't win in the Halo universe? And the answer to that is, they were winning, and nearly did. The Master Chief wasn't fucking around on an alien megastructure in Halo 3 because he thought it'd be fun. He was doing it because it was a Hail Mary to stop the Covenant from wiping humanity out. Almost every engagement with the UNSC beyond the scale of some ODSTs versus a squad of brutes was a loss for humanity and a win for the Covenant. Hell, Reach makes two things abundantly clear from the start. The planet is the largest and most defended one in human space beyond even Earth, and it's doomed to fall the moment it's discovered.
Slip space rupture detected.
Yeah, we're picking up anomalies too. Are you reading
Slip
it?
space rupture detected.
Multiple covenant signatures.
Slip space
Does anyone
rupture
have a
detected.
They're everywhere.
Slip
Can't
space
be
rupture
happening.
detected.
40% of all of the UNSC's Navy was deployed to Reach, and they still lost. It's not like 40K where the writers tell us the Imperium is fighting a losing war and then every battle we see they effortlessly stomp. The UNSC actually was about to lose and humanity was going to perish. It's almost like we never see what Covenant weapons can truly do because they're up against a version of humanity that can't hope to stop them. Sure, the Covenant probably wouldn't be able to stand to Dark Age of technology stuff or the pre-fall Eldar, but you can't count that because it doesn't exist in any meaningful way anymore. They don't have the ability to make that shit any longer. Plus, there's intentionally not enough information about the period to say for sure exactly what humanity had beyond really advanced tech guys for real. So saying that 40K wins because everyone used to have really cool things in the setting isn't an argument. It's a cop-out in the same vein as someone using an everything-proof shield during recess. On the topic of things that aren't me complaining, let's talk about slip space. It'll be quick so I don't bore you to death with the specifics of pretend space travel. Covenant slip space isn't as fast as warp travel can be. That being said, it's infinitely more reliable. The warp can take you across the galaxy in minutes, or you can arrive at your destination 1,000 years too late, or 1,000 too early, or you arrive and everyone in the vessel has aged to death, or been replaced by demons because you aren't just traveling through another dimension, you're traveling through hell. To be fair, Imperial warp travel is reliable. It's not as memey as the fanbase often makes it out to be, but that doesn't change the fact that things regularly go wrong and shit arrives late all the time. I could repeat this wiki article word for word, but I'll just let you read it. The short of it is that when you have all of these flaws in your FTL travel, something is going wrong. By contrast, while Covenant slip space isn't as fast as warp travel at its fastest, it's still pretty goddamn speedy. The speed they have is roughly 912 light years per day in slip space. That's pretty much instant between systems that are next to each other. So the Covenant could show up over an Agri world one day, glass it, then invade the Forge world the next sector over. Also, when something goes wrong in slip space, a single person disappears or you feel sick for a few days. When something goes wrong in the warp, the Dark Gods eat the soul of everyone involved. And because of how reliably made it is, these slip space problems almost never happen on Covenant ships, only the shit-tastic UNSC ones. Also, warp drives need to reach a certain distance away from any major celestial bodies in a system, or to put it in academic terms, shit's about to get fucky. Souls taken, ships exploded, planets corrupted, that kind of fun stuff. Covenant slip space drives, meanwhile, can jump mid-atmosphere and only cause damage to the surrounding city. In fact, the only reason they don't do this more often is that the reverse engineer tech is so advanced they don't know they can do it. They still appear directly over planets pretty frequently though, so on top of powerful weaponry, their ships also have an amount of mobility that 40K ships really can't match. Maybe Eldar ships? And I guess the orcs don't really give a shit about space OSHA protocols, so them as well. So I've talked about why I think they're equal in 40K long enough. How would they act when put in this shitstorm of a galaxy? Well, first of all, I don't think it'd be hard to put them in 40K. Honestly, not really. Just a little bit of retconning and presto, they're located in some isolated corner of the galaxy and only discover humanity sometime in the late 30,000s. Maybe an Imperial Guard force responds to some planets losing contact before they themselves go dark, and the few surviving transmissions show a variety of strange aliens working in unison to take down the Guard. Then comes the official announcement.
For your destruction is the will of the gods, and I am their instrument.
After that, human world after human world starts going dark. Of course, this isn't a war the Covenant can win. Despite being able to fight on even footing with the Imperium, they can't produce on an even footing with the Imperium. It's too big. Casualties will be enormous, but the Covenant will be fought to a standstill. That being said, like many enemies in 40K, the Imperium will be unable to finish them off as they're surrounded on all sides. They don't have nearly enough industry to fight the Imperium on even ground, but in the stalemate that is 40K setting, they can certainly hold them off. The sides would enter a cold war that occasionally turns hot, with the Covenant seeing humanity as once again desecrating the gifts their gods left behind, you know, with their dirty human footsteps. Only this time they'd be even more furious, because instead of just studying Forerunner artifacts, humanity would actively destroy it for being Xeno's garbage. On top of Mechanicus, of course, studying anything Forerunner they find. In fact, depending on what you do with the lore, they might even especially hate the Space Marines, seeing them as humanity's latest iteration of the demons they fought millennia ago. Psychers will be their greatest weakness. At first they won't have a goddamn clue as to what's going on, and even when they figure it out, they won't have much to do beyond shoot the guy making lightning come out of his crotch, which, to be fair, is an effective strategy, but it'll still be rough going for the poor grunt caught in a smite. As for the other factions, it varies. Covenant would despise chaos. A religion that isn't worshipping the Forerunners, combined with the fact it's mostly humans, Glass and 8 Chaos fleets on site, please and thank you. Plus, these humans are worshipping literal demons, so it's not like they need the encouragement. While some Covenant members might join Chaos for a variety of reasons, like grunts defecting to Nurgle for a better life, or brutes to Khorne because big stupid smash god make monkey brain happy, most would likely stay in the path of the Great Journey and combat Chaos. Zinj and Nurgle in particular would be on an avoid at all cost list between plagues and magic. The Tau would be ignored. Probably. First contact, if they did reach each other, would probably go something like, you join the Covenant. No, you join the greater good. And then there'd be a fight, and the Covenant would decide the blueberries aren't worth the effort. Though if they did decide it's worth the effort, 1,000 warships and an attack moon showing up over the Tau capital would probably change their mind on incorporating the Covenant pretty quickly. You know, before they're glassed off the face of the galaxy. In fact, speaking of the Tau, the Covenant would probably be the nicest race in 40k in this scenario, which is so fucking weird to think about, but it's true. Their hate boner is reserved for humanity. As long as they worship the Forerunners, they'd probably welcome any other client races, and honestly, all those miscellaneous creatures in 40k that don't have an army list might end up joining them, if only for protection from the Imperium. They'd fight the Orcs, which is a revelation, I know. Plasma weapons help keep the Orc spores from spreading, so that would be in the Covenant's favor, but expect them to constantly be under siege as the Orcs realize those airy gits and split-jaw boys put up a proper fight. The Eldar would probably be neutral with them, with the occasional spout of hostility when the Covenant land on a maiden world and BL Tan gets its panties in a twist over it. Of course, the Eldar would most likely stick to indirect methods of warfare since they don't have enough of a tech advantage to outright smash the Covenant, and certainly not enough numbers to wear them down. Psykers once again will play a huge role in combating them. Dark Eldar would occasionally raid them for supplies and torture slaves, but as with every other faction, they wouldn't cause enough of a problem to warrant focusing the Covenant's full attention on them. Not that it'd help if they did decide to do that, given that Kamara is the most compact and defended shithole in the universe. The Covenant might even hire some Corsairs for a while if they can convince the massively arrogant Eldar to help for a bit. Unlikely, but not impossible. The Exodites would get the short end of the stick like usual. The first few Maiden Worlds would probably put up a fight until the Covenant learned it isn't worth the effort and it's best to just glass them off the face of existence or turn around and find another planet to bother. And I have no idea what the Harlequins would do. Maybe capture some brutes and put them in a circus or something. The Necrons would have an advantage here. With both races lacking psychic powers, the much more advanced tech the Space Tomb Kings have will grant them victory often. That being said, any recently awakened or unawakened tomb worlds that are discovered would be glassed before they could get ready, and plasma weapons are still plenty capable of hurting the Necrons before anyone forgets that fact. I know I sound like a broken record with the plasma weapons, but it's important to emphasize, and I like saying the word plasma, so I'm gonna keep doing it anyways. The Tyranids would probably be on their hit list too, because it's very likely they'd see how similar they are to the Flood and freak the absolute fuck out. They'd be more than willing to scour any Tyranid-infested worlds clear.
One single flood spore can destroy a species. Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
But unlike any other faction in 40k, because they use slip space, they don't need to fear the shadow of the warp. Expect them to be pretty effective at dealing with Tyranids because of this advantage. Of course, the Tyranids are still gonna vor plenty of Covenant worlds. Expect to hear curses against the parasite often. To end the video, I'm gonna say something that's gonna make a lot of people shit a brick. I think Space Marines, depending on the chapter, would get shit stomped by the Covenant. Now, before you mail me a pipe bomb covered in cum, hear me out. I've talked about plasma weapons enough here, I won't repeat myself. But the thing is, a lot of Space Marine chapters don't fight in a way that would help them against the Covenant. They're obsessed with honor and closing the gap to fight in melee. Meanwhile, I think the Covenant has powerful enough weapons to take them down before they do so. The elites, like I said, are also obsessed with honor, but that honor isn't brain dead. They'll use stealth technology and any possible advantage to get the drop on the Space Marines. You might say a sudden rapid assault like drop pods is the answer, but keep two things in mind. A, the Covenant is able to shoot these drop pods down, they've done it before in the Halo games, and B, the Covenant use them too, often. They also have experience fighting the UNSC, who uses them as well, so they know how to fight back against them. So the Space Wolves or Blood Angels will deep strike in and hope to get the drop on the Covenant, only for them to get mowed down by two grunts on a plasma turret and a group of elites that drop behind them armed with energy swords and fuel rod guns. Of course, this isn't across the board, I'm just trying to point out that I don't think it'd be as simple as Space Marines beat Covenant, big surprise. The Spartans didn't beat the Covenant by outflexing them. They used their superior wit and ability as the ultimate special ops unit that just happens to consist of demigods to outfight the Covenant at every turn, and even then they still took casualties often. Go play Halo on one of the higher difficulties and directly run into every turret you find for how that would work out for the Space Marines. Still, certain chapters like the Ultramarines with their adaptability would be able to stand their ground very well. And honestly, I think chapters like the Raven Guard would be the most feared because of how close they act to the demons the Covenant is used to facing. And the melee chapters would still bloody them, I just don't think it's a war of attrition they can win. And of course, a bolter is still a grenade launcher assault rifle. It's gonna hurt whoever it hits. Once again, the Covenant will view humanity's super soldiers as demons to be feared, but demons to be slaughtered nonetheless. So that's why I think the Covenant would be a great faction in 40k. Will it ever happen? No, of course not. Officially anyways. There is, however, actually a fan codex for the Covenant. In between third-party models and the dead Halo war game, it isn't impossible to find some minis for them. Either way, I hope you had fun with part 1 of this miniseries. The Covenant, like I said, can't stop the 40k galaxy. Not even close. Let's see if the Forerunners can do better. Master Chief could take a Space Marine in a fight. Fuck you, fight me up. So last time I discussed my personal favorite sci-fi to sim for, I said the Covenant could survive in the 40k galaxy. Crucially though, I said, or at least I meant, survive, not thrive. They wouldn't be winning the great game that is Warhammer by any means, just staving off defeat and giving the other factions a bloody nose when the situation called for it. So despite what you might think, I wasn't just fanboying over Halo with all my might, because I acknowledged that the Covenant would be supreme. See, Imperium, Necron, and Tyranid fans, we can get along. Until the Forerunners show up and wipe the galaxy completely clean, that is. Now I'm just gonna fanboy over Halo. The Forerunners would be a horrible faction to put into 40k because it would be like if you put the War in Heaven Catan into the modern day setting of the galaxy. Not the Necrons, the Catan is their own faction. I should mention that there's going to be spoilers for the Forerunner series of books, so if you haven't read those I would recommend it because they're really good, but either way, just be forewarned of that. Let's dive into some Halo lore, shall we? A little bit of background to set the scene first would probably be smart. In Halo, the Forerunners were the civilization that made, well, Halo. 7 of them in fact, though before that there were 12 until they got exploded. They had roughly 3 million worlds in their domain, and their technology could do pretty much anything you could think of. Live nearly forever, Dyson spheres, and massive artificial planets. If it's a sci-fi megastructure or something like that, then the Forerunners had at least one of them, most likely several. They controlled the galaxy nearly without equal, fighting and winning a war with ancient humanity and its allies who were nearly as advanced as they were. There were also the Precursors who seeded the galaxy with life before being overthrown by the Forerunners. Not quite related, but if you haven't noticed, Halo loves giving its alien species descriptors for names. There was, of course, also the Flood, who finally put the Forerunners to the sword after millions of years of dominance, but we'll get to them later. Their empire, the Ecumene, lasted from about 10 million BC to 100,000 BC. Now, if your only knowledge of the Forerunners was from the first 3 games, then you'd reasonably think that I've lost my goddamn mind. I mean, yeah, you could tell they were ancient and powerful, but there just wasn't enough info on them to assume more than that. Similar to mankind during the Dark Age of technology or the pre-fall Eldar, there just wasn't enough knowledge on the Forerunners to get a good picture. You could theorize all you want, but it'd be just that. Theory, with a few scraps of information to go off of. I mean, the most you'd see are those shitty Sentinels that go down in a few hits, or the Didex Promethean that can be taken down with 5.56 rounds. This is because you're never fighting the Forerunners in the Halo games. You're fighting a shadow of their shadow. In the Forerunner trilogy of the books, and even with some of what we can see in modern Halo games, they're shown as one of the most powerful sci-fi factions to have ever been written. At least before we start getting into things like the Zealeverse, where the Big Bang is weaponized into a mass-produced assault rifle. No, I'm not making that up. Why don't we get the elephant in the room out of the way first? No, not that one. In the blink of an eye, everything sentient in the galaxy is dead. Everything that isn't a Necron and maybe the Tyranids, depending on how close they are to the Flood, is just gone. If you don't happen to be traveling through the warp, you're dead. Depending on how you think it works, chaos could either be supercharged because of the rapid and simultaneous death across the galaxy would be racked with warp storms if not just have a whole new Eye of Terror created, or the Chaos Gods would all die out because everything feeding them just bit the dust. Either way, just about everything in the material world is gone. But here's something about the Halo array that if you haven't read the Forerunner trilogy, you might not know. As much as it was a weapon of last resort, that's at its highest power setting. Did you know you can fine-tune the level of destruction you'd like from it? It can be limited to only a single system, or even planet. So as much as they were the final solution to the Flood, they're also just stupidly OP weapons without killing everyone in the galaxy. Got a planet you need for strategic reasons, but the Guard has it fortified to hell and back, or the Orcs are there in the usual Orc number of yes? Not anymore. Press a few buttons and now you have a nearly empty rock. You could also directly encircle a planet with one because they're just so damn big. I don't know why you would want to do it, but it was a cool scene in the books when some ancient human realized he had to Tokyo drift one around Earth to stay alive. The Forerunners also have the technology to cross the galaxies at will if they feel the need, so theoretically they could just float them in and come aboard later to their almost completely empty new galaxy. But galactic scale death machines aren't the only advantage they have, not even close. For example, every single Forerunner has a smart AI equivalent called an Ancilla in their bodysuit. Every last one of them. They range in power from help with daily tasks to commanding entire systems of other AI. Those bodysuits also make the Forerunners biologically immortal to the point that one of them dying is noted as being a big deal. Before the Flood got to them anyways, but we'll get to that. In this regard, they were the pre-fall Elder without the psychic powers, except also their suits could still give them scientific psychic powers. Look at this bastard, he just force-pulled the Master Chief for shits and giggles. Speaking of Master Chief, you know his power armor, the apex of humanity's military technology, with shields and armor capable of taking a plasma round to the chest and just keeping on trucking? Nothing compared to the Forerunners. It was declared by Guilty Spark to be roughly the Forerunner equivalent of a hazmat suit. Not real armor, a hazmat suit. Even when he went from Mark 5 to 6 between the games, Guilty Spark was still like, why haven't you upgraded your armor, Reclaimer? Do you have that much of a death wish now that your blue stripper friend is gone? They had something colloquially called plasma jockeys by other Forerunners, which are engineers who had the job of taming stars for future engineering projects. They'd go in, make sure the star was going to have a solar ejection or anything that would ruin the day for any Forerunners nearby working on stuff, and just generally help the Forerunners use stars like massive intergalactic Legos. Doing this wasn't a massive Forerunner undertaking that required their entire species' resources and knowledge to undertake. They sent in Steve from the IT department. This is what their miners did to get it ready for the engineers. They didn't even send the scientific masterminds to screw around with the stars. They could create pocket dimensions the size of a solar system, fill the entire thing with actual stuff so it's basically a planet the size of a star system, and then compress that space to be about the size of a football if you're not inside of it. They mastered the physical world in its entirety. I mean, like I said, the Halo rings were bigger than planets. They were regularly causing stars to go supernova with just their capital ships in their war against the Flood. Not a grand superweapons like what the Necrons have, these were just their battleships. Their weaponry could also atomize almost anything that it hit. That one you don't even gotta read into the lore to find, just play any of the newer Halo games. There's a throwaway line in the Forerunner trilogy that they were powering the construction of an installation by tunneling to another universe and taking energy from it. This isn't a major plot point in how they're desperately trying to create the Halos to beat the Flood and are turning to major scientific endeavors to do so. It's like a sentence and a half of dialogue about some guy's side project. Regarding the Halos themselves again, not only did they kill everything in the galaxy, the Forerunners completely reseeded the galaxy with life after they were gone. Such was their intelligence that they set up entire systems to take care of the galaxy even though they themselves were all but extinct. Oh, and those crappy Sentinels I mentioned earlier, they deployed those in the trillions. They made at least one entire planet out of nothing but Sentinels. Imagine enough robots to blot out the sky and force a planet into permanent darkness, and that's just a small portion of what the Forerunners could do. On top of all this, their starships are nearly immune to damage. I'm afraid I don't have fancy made-up metals like adamantite to impress you with. I just know that one took thousands of missiles and several railgun shots going at an appreciable fraction of the speed of light and didn't even get scratched. The cherry on top of all this is that they produced all of this at a galactic scale. They can go toe-to-toe with the Imperium in industry and everything they have is just better. In fact, they could probably outshine the Imperium in industry because 3 million worlds is better than 1 million. Though admittedly Forge worlds are nuts, so I'd say it's equal footing. I mean, they built an installation several times the size of a planet outside the galaxy for God's sake. The only thing that's done anything like that in 40k is the Catan, literal machine gods of the material world in the setting. Their stuff also lasts damn near forever in what's essentially mint condition. Take even the Necrons. Sometimes when they wake up, their programming is going a little bit wonky. Meanwhile, most pieces of Dark Age tech that the Imperium finds are either horribly broken or corrupted into near uselessness. If it is a fully functional STC, it's probably sabotaged by chaos or something and it's going to summon a Keeper of Secrets the moment you build the design it gives you. Because as is well established, no one in the godforsaken universe of 40k is allowed to have nice things. Forerunner stuff, meanwhile, works as good as it did when it was first made 100,000 years after the fact. Someone said in a Discord I was in once that the Forerunners still weren't up to 40k because the Catan could drain energy like the Forerunner could. That's fair. And yes, I was that asshole who brought up an online debate about two universes fighting. Anyways, back on topic. There's several differences between what the Forerunners did and what the Catan did in this case. One, the Catan did it to species on worlds. The Forerunner could do it to entire universes, so there's a huge difference of scale. Two, understand what all of that would entail. The Forerunners didn't just eat something that was put in front of them. They had the tunnel to another reality entirely, create and set up a system to somehow get energy from that universe, and then turn that energy into something usable. And to further set the two apart, unlike the Catan absorbing the souls of the Necron tier, this was apparently such a minor detail, such a not worth talking about accomplishment for the Forerunners that it didn't even merit an entire paragraph in the book. The guy doing it was just like, yeah, just hooking up my universe-scaled car battery to the system so I can build my megastructure, don't mind me. And again, like I mentioned earlier, you know how that one edgy Catan screwed off from the galaxy and built a planet around himself? The Forerunners did the same thing and built one of their own. It's the Ark. You could see the Milky Way from it during Halo 3, and they made a bigger one before that. It just made the mistake of existing within 100,000 light years of the Flood and was destroyed. That's such a logistical feat that it's hard to even fathom what that means for the Forerunners' capabilities. Because if they built it inside the galaxy, they have the ability to move objects the size of planets around the universe at will. If they built it outside the galaxy, meanwhile, that means they have the infrastructure and technology to move such massive amounts of material around that they can build such megastructures in the infinite nothingness of extragalactic space. They could also digitize and construct mechanical bodies for people, which is what the Didact did to create the Prometheans. races. So if you still don't think they can match beings like the Catan, they did pretty much the same thing as what they did to the Necron tier. Relatedly, the process is pretty much the same, only you can weaponize it. They didn't even need the conversion chambers or anything like that. It was just point the damn thing in a planet and bam, instant robot army. They of course were masters of genetics and biology as well, because why not let them have that too? They would more or less mutate themselves when they reached certain milestones in their lives by integrating the DNA of other Forerunners and taking on their aspects. This also gave them much of the memories and personality of their donor, like when the Didact from Halo 4 gave his DNA to a Forerunner previously known as Bornstellar, who after that was just called the Didact. The Forerunner known as the Librarian even started referring to Bornstellar as her husband after this happened, she being married to the previous Didact, of course. Oh, and they can also biologically imprint your consciousness into someone else without any soul magic. Doesn't matter what race you are either, they stuck a human into a Forerunner once. To hell with it, give someone the memories of a dog and let it speak to the guy every now and then. They could de-evolve you too, just in case all of this sounded too, you know, progressive and scientific for you. They did that to ancient humanity after they defeated them in a war. And because most of this video is just going to be disjointed rambling about the Forerunners' capabilities, let's talk about slipspace again real quick. It'll be even briefer than last time because this is a video for fun, not theoretical physics. Slipspace is actually a lot like the warp. Things can go wrong and people can straight up disappear into it. It has streams and currents that dictate how travel is done within it. It's also slower than warp travel, at least when the warp isn't spitting you back in time 1,000 years. The thing is, this applies to the UNC and the Covenant. Forerunner slipspace, meanwhile, is nearly instant. They could cross the entire galaxy in days if they so wished to. A Forerunner slipspace drive will never vanish someone into nothingness like a human drive would, and whether it's slipspace or not, they can teleport entire armies across massive distances. On top of all of this, they don't have to deal with the forces of hell interfering with them or causing them to appear centuries before or after the event they're responding to takes place. At the very best interpretation, the webway is still only equal to Forerunner slipspace, and it can still break down and be corrupted like the warp, unlike slipspace. Again, like I mentioned, you can also do this in atmosphere, which you can't do with the warp. The only reason the Covenant didn't do these in atmosphere jumps is because they don't realize just how advanced the reverse engineered Forerunner stuff is. And you can bet your emperor bothering ass the Forerunners know what their stuff can do. And because I feel like someone might say I haven't gone enough into specifics to justify this whole video, here's a barrage of those. Their ships had weapons that cause gravity to rip apart the enemy. Each of their infantry weapons does what the Necrons do to their enemies, only faster, that is to say, tear them apart molecule by molecule. They can use antimatter weapons on their ships, which violently explodes in contact with normal matter, because that's just how that works. They had potentially up to trillions of warriors in their army at the time of the Flood War, and this was after centuries of disarming themselves due to political infighting. So unlike the Covenant, they have the numbers, power, and industry to fight with. And to top it all off, at least some of them had 6 fingers. I mean, what else is there to say? 6 fingers! Maybe they had 2 tails, too. As for Psyker powers, I don't think they'll be enough. The Forerunners' advantage in every other field is too great, even ignoring the fact that they could recreate psychic powers to some extent through technology alone. Sure, the Forerunners are in trouble when Magnus or Eldrad take to the field, but the average Psyker who could just about throw a fireball without exploding himself is going to be turned into mincemeat. Anyways, now's probably time to give some structure to this video, instead of just continuing to ramble incoherently about Forerunner capabilities. Let's see how the Forerunners would interact with the factions of the 40k galaxy. And spoiler alert for what's coming up, you're going to hear some variation of the words, and then the Forerunners wipe them out pretty frequently. Let's start with the big lads. What would the interactions between the Imperium of Man and the Forerunners look like? Well, at first it would look just like the Imperium of Man's interactions with any other alien species that doesn't keel over and submit. Xeno, heretic, murder, kill, you know, all that overused stuff. And then they would find out that, oh shit, these aliens have triple our territory and technology far beyond us. Exterminatuses, what is the plural of exterminatus? Exterminati? Whatever it is, the Imperium would start dropping those like it was going out of style, because trying to land the Imperial Guard to fight the Forerunners is just going to result in you having one less army of guardsmen. And fair's fair, a virus bomb's going to hurt anyone, Forerunners or not, especially since part 2 of a virus bombing is setting the atmosphere on fire. But the Forerunners would learn pretty quickly that Imperial ships carry planet busters and start devoting more assets to their navy. And then it would be a very rapid downhill spiral against the Imperium. Of course the Space Marines would be involved in this, they're always involved. That being said, remember that funny little clip where the Didact drags Master Chief around like it's Gary's mod? That they'd still be under heavy fire from any fight with the Forerunners, and because I'm not Games Workshop, I don't feel like giving the Space Marines plot armor. Because of the level of tech the Forerunners are working with, they're going to get cut down with little more ceremony than the Guardsmen. Ceramite will give the Forerunners as much trouble as it does the Necrons, which is to say, thank you. Anyway, that is to say it's not going to give them much trouble at all. Plus, at a certain point, the Forerunners are going to realize that even if the Space Marines are more trouble than they're worth to fight head on, they can just annihilate their ships and worlds to cause them to bleed to death via the most mismatched form of attrition warfare. The Mechanicus might fare fares slightly better, if only because of a desperate attempt to reverse engineer what few pieces of Forerunner tech they can get their hands on. The Sisters of Battle might make the Forerunners minorly confused when they gun down some lady with angel wings only for her to show right back up, but resurrective immortality is only so helpful when you just get gunned down again by some alien throwing antimatter at you like it's not a big deal. Or the energy sword gun from Halo Legends. Now that'll put some hurt on anyone. Custodes are going to cause problems for the Forerunners, but in the grand scheme of things, they still won't be helpful enough to save the Imperium because, as it turns out, 10,000 is not a very big number on a galactic scale. In a 1v1, the Custodes have more than a fair shot, but it's never going to be a 1v1 for them. But let me introduce you to a more interesting concept: the Forerunners pacifying and integrating human worlds. See, in Halo, the Forerunners stomped humanity because from their perspective, it seemed like the human race as a whole was gunning for their territory, rather than humanity cleansing Forerunner planets infected by the Flood, which was what was actually happening. But at 40k, I don't think it would take too long for them to realize that there's a whole lot of human worlds that, for whatever reason, would be more than happy to be free of Imperial control. Given that a driving motivation for the Forerunners is the mantle of responsibility, which instructs them to guide and protect the galaxy, I've no doubt that a decent amount of planets that fall to the Forerunners would do so willingly. I mean, it happens to the Tau, surely the same thing could happen for the Forerunners. And while yes, it does come with the caveat that the Forerunners are a bit more equal than everyone else, once again, this is just the same as the Tau and it still works for them. By the end of this war, I don't expect the Imperium to still be a major entity. Maybe not completely gone if only because of the Emperor, but certainly reduced to a shell of its former self. Relatedly, and admittedly this is a bit of a stretch, there's a chance that the Emperor wouldn't hate the Forerunners like other aliens. I mean, in 40k there's the Dark Eldar, the Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, and more. Those aliens suck. But the Forerunners, who of course would still be focused on keeping themselves powerful, would still be more than willing to focus on the greater threats to the galaxy like Chaos. An interesting result of them somehow appearing in 40k could be a sort of temporary alliance with the Imperium, because as we all know, the Imperium is a god-awful government with how it treats its people, but the guys next door sacrificing entire planets to one of four Satans are probably a lot worse for galactic peace. Of course, the Imperium is still a horrendous state, and the Emperor is, to put it lightly, a bit of a control freak. So there's no way the Forerunners would tolerate the Imperium, and it would be temporary at best. That being said, it's still something I find to be an interesting idea. As for the other species, let's go. The Tau are a brief talk. The Forerunners might be able to convince the Tau to peace talks, otherwise they're gonna force them back onto their home planets like they did with ancient humanity in Halo. The various other minor Xeno species would probably be turned into something between client saints and allies. The Eldar and them would likely have little reason to interact. I mean, the craft worlds in ideal circumstances sit in their own little corner of the galaxy. If the Forerunners show up and suddenly start wiping out threats to the Eldar left, right, and center, there probably wouldn't be much in the way of reasons for them to fight. Same goes for the Exodites. That being said, any fight the Eldar try to get into with the Forerunners is going to result in there being one less craft world around. Biel-Tan especially is going to learn the hard way that at their weakest possible power level, a civilization equal in power to the War in Heaven Necrons just showed up. The Dark Eldar? Ha! Say goodbye, Kamara. I don't care how many black holes Vex sends their way. The Forerunners' #1 priority with them is going to be to slip space rupture a Halo ring into that godforsaken place and send everyone in it to Kingdom Come. The Harlequins, meanwhile, might actually form a sort of alliance with them, since their overall goals are generally more benevolent to everyone rather than just the Eldar. The Orcs are just going to be exterminated, like, wholesale. Oh sure, they'll do their best to put up a fight, but then some Forerunner scientist is going to catapult a star at them for funsies. I wish I had more to say about them, because I do like the Orcs. War in Heaven Quark would probably give them a pretty tough fight, but modern 40k Orcs are going to tragically be pretty unceremoniously destroyed. Same likely goes for the Tyranids. Unlike the Flood, there's no mistaking this particular intergalactic swarm of locusts for a minor threat you can contain. A hive fleet is many things, but subtle is not one of them. You might say that gene sealer cults could be an issue, but those Ancilla the Forerunner have in their suits would pretty quickly realize that the guy inside is suddenly praying to the Tyranids and alert other Forerunners to the threat. Remember, they all have one. The Tyranids, meanwhile, also don't have the same strength as the Flood. They don't expand quite as rapidly as the Flood, and they don't gain information in the same way as the Flood does. Tyranids are all about adapting to their enemy's strengths. The Flood outright steals those strengths. The Forerunners would find it much easier to deal with them, and if nothing else, they can send in the robotic armies of Sentinels to not have to worry about the whole biomass harvesting issue the Tyranids cause. There are in fact reasons that they didn't just do that with the Flood, in case you were wondering why they didn't do that in Halo lore, but we'll get to that later. The Leagues of Votann, since there's suddenly enough information on them to talk about, might get along fairly well with them. The Forerunners clearly have no problem with AI, so they might even get the Forerunners to help repair the Votann themselves. Granted, the new squats don't seem to be that much more keen on aliens than the Imperium is, and if it does lead to war, then the extra tech the Leagues have won't be enough to spare them from the Ecumene's wrath. I don't think Chaos is going to have that much luck either. Unlike perhaps even some members of the Covenant, there's nothing to tempt the Forerunners with. Tempt them with power? They have all the power they want and more. And the ambitious among the Forerunner elite aren't stupid enough to sell their souls to demons. Tempt them with pleasure? For one, their entire mentality is ensuring the galaxy is at peace with each other, which is inherently selfless. space. And 2, they have access to almost all the pleasures anyone could ask for if they really want it. Why go for more? Because some crab-headed dude said it would feel really good, trust me? Inflict plagues on them and make them suffer until they join, perhaps? Well, they're biologically immortal, and for reference, the UNSC, who would absolutely get stomped in 40k, have curing cancer as something so routine a merchant ship's medbay can treat it. If the UNSC can do that, as far below the Forerunners as they are, disease is just not an issue for the Forerunners. There's nothing for Chaos to latch onto and corrupt the Forerunners with. As for actual battles, like with the Chaos Space Marines, well, see what I said would happen to normal Space Marines for how that'll turn out. Demons would do better, but not by much. Tzeentch demons might pull some screwy stuff on the Forerunners to take a decent amount down, but not enough to balance out what the Forerunners have in number and power. And if they reverse engineer Necron tech, which I have no doubt they would, they'll learn how to shut down Chaos. Hell, they might even team up with a few dynasties to push back Chaos, since the Forerunners have nothing against AI, and a few Necron dynasties aren't that bad. Speaking of, we finally have the Necrons, and oh boy is this gonna cause some colorful arguments. As well as the Krork and the pre-fall Eldar, the War in Heaven era Necrons could certainly put up a hell of a fight. While I still think the Forerunners are on equal footing with the Catan, the sheer amount of them around as well as the numberless legions of united Necron military would be quite the challenge to take down. The thing is, this video is all about the Forerunners facing off against modern-day 40k, and the modern-day Necrons are, to be frank, a shadow of their former selves, as is always the case with 40k factions except for the Tau, and Tyranids, I guess. They're disunified and war with each other almost as often as the Imperium blows up its own planets, and usually for even less valid reasons. While I'm sure they've mostly woken up, there's still going to be some in slumber who have not and wouldn't be able to fight the Forerunners. Their weaponry is at best equal to the Forerunners, and combined with their lack of unity in the Forerunners' supreme industrial capabilities, there won't be as many Necrons fighting on the same battlefield as there will be Forerunners in their construct. Plus, slip space once again reigns supreme. They can cross the galaxy in days if they need to. They can burn down your planet, and then that same fleet can be a segmentum over by tomorrow. And to top it all off, even if you do think the Necrons are technologically superior, it's well within Forerunner capability to reverse engineer Necron technology. I mean, the Forerunners are so advanced that they consider binary primitive to them. Binary, that thing even Dark Age humanity used in its tech? One Forerunner found an ancient Forerunner ship and was shocked that they ever used it. That's how far they've gone beyond it, technologically speaking. The Forerunners, to throw one last bit of disconnected rambling at you, also have something called the Domain. While the Domain is absolutely monstrous and will be covered in a later video because this is going to be a 3-parter miniseries, the best way to simplify it is Forerunner Internet. While information can be lost in it, more recent stuff is fairly easy for the Forerunners to access. So a Forerunner can research into Necron tech, put his findings into the Domain, and bam! Every Forerunner in the galaxy can now know how that particular piece of technology works, what its strengths are, and most importantly for the military, how to counter it. There's far, far more to the Domain, but for now, let's just leave it at that. And if nothing else, the Forerunners had devices accessible by individual people that could accelerate time so quickly that billions of years would pass to them in an instant. I don't care what you are, Necron or not, that's gonna mess you up. There's a lot more I could talk about the Forerunners, how they weaponize their own method of FTL, the deeper concepts of the Domain, how their FTL itself started diving into metaphysics, but by now I'm sure you get the point of this video. In modern day 40k, I think the Forerunners would reign supreme and force the mantle onto the Milky Way galaxy as they did millions of years ago. And of course, this is one big opinion piece, so please tell me how wrong or right you think I am. I fully admit I'm biased in favor of Halo on this, but so what? Biases make life fun. It's good to hear a differing opinion every now and then. Either way, here's part 2. There's one last major faction, I guess, to cover in Halo for next time, and they're hungry.
Now I shall talk, and you shall listen.
Except none of these videos matter because the Halo 1 Magnum can one-shot the entire 40k universe. Also, Spartan 1337 can snap card in half like a Kit Kat. Dragon Ball Halo, come on, baby!
I'm one heck of a mama myself.
You knew this was coming. I kept teasing it, and if nothing else, if I was ferociously fanboying over Halo for the Covenant and Forerunners, I couldn't have just ignored the faction that is pretty much responsible for everything we see in the Halo universe. I mean, come on, without them we'd have no anything. There'd still be Forerunner domination of the galaxy, and mankind would... Actually, I don't know. Part of the reason for the Forerunner-human war was because humanity was simultaneously retreating from and eliminating these parasites. Who knows what would have happened had they not intervened. There's something you should know, though. While I will of course talk about what you're likely familiar with in this miniseries, and without spoiling it too early, I'll actually give the factions in 40k some credit for once, the creatures you know from the original Halo trilogy were once far different from their modern iterations. What became a cruel and corruptive zombie-like hive mind was once the most dominant race in the Halo universe. And yes, I mean universe. So in a way, this is a bit of a 2-for-1 video. The first portions will largely be lore and the precursors, because in order to understand the main subject of the video, I feel obligated to do my best to explain what we know about them. And of course, the more I'm talking about Halo, the happier I am. I'll try not to focus on them too much when they were the precursors, and I'll chapter the video, so if you just want to skip to the 40k bits, feel free. But to finally stop beating around the bush on this matter, allow me to tell you how the flood of Halo could devour the 40k galaxy. But first, a word. Not from a sponsor. Aha, I fucking gotcha, didn't I? No sponsor in this one, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you all. Nearly to 100k and a new year's coming up, so I hope everyone else has a good new year, and I hope this channel does as well. Insurance issues that'll haunt me for the rest of my life aside, this has pretty much become my full-time job, and I couldn't do it without all of you. How fitting the next be talking about insurance bullshit. But seriously, thank you all for the support. Now then, I hope you're wearing a Class 12 combat skin, because otherwise you're in for a rough time.
I am a monument to all your sins.
Unlike 40k's own devouring hive mind race, the Flood were not always, well, what I just described. They were once a race known as the Precursors. I'm tempted to describe them as the Forerunners on steroids, but that doesn't come close to what they were. Because what they really were H.P. Lovecraft gods. To say they ruled the universe is a funny way of putting it, because they had interesting outlooks on reality, but if they wished to, I've no doubt they could have. Before I get into their tech and all that stuff you're no doubt terribly interested in, so you could explain how Cato Sicarius could one-shot them, I want to talk about them for a bit. They seeded life in the galaxy billions of years ago, so already we're on a timescale well past 40k's own. They could accelerate the evolution of life as fast as or as slow as they wished it to be, and the reverse was true as well. They would oftentimes spend their lives as devolved, humble farming races, for the form they took was of no consequence to them. One day they might decide to be Cthulhu, the next day they're Gilgamesh, and then 100,000 years later they're Farmer Brown counting his space chickens for the yearly harvest. Don't think about that sentence too much. I grew up in the suburbs, alright? They believed that the universe itself was alive in a way, only in a way and scale far different from you and me. They believed that the consciousness of living beings served to enrich the universe as a whole, a concept in Halo known as neural physics. If this is sounding like some real hippie shit to you, then you're probably right. But if the hippies are able to throw galaxies at you like ping pong balls, maybe they're onto something. But before that, a bit of how they viewed life. They weren't good or evil, strictly speaking, but they considered suffering, strife, and indeed evil as necessary parts of life. They believed it added to its sweetness, which is the only word I can give you because whatever word they would have used didn't really cross the language barrier so goodly. Now for their tech abilities and all that good stuff. Part of what helped them be able to live so many different lives is that they could reincarnate and live anew. Death, after all, is just another part of life, so of course they wish to experience it every now and then. And in a rare moment of me actually dissing the Eldar, the Precursors managed to do this for billions of years without murder-fucking a god into existence. Good job, Precursors. They also weren't a hive mind, by the way. Not yet, anyways, so this was straight-up reincarnation, not having your brainwaves vored back into a collective consciousness. They could do pretty much everything the Forerunners could do. You know, cross into different universes, throw planets at people to piss them off, the usual. Except with the Precursors, it wouldn't be a planet, it'd be a galaxy. Now that's a good way to tell someone to fuck off. I'm not making that up, by the way. The Forerunner known as the Didact had a freak out when he learned what they could do, i.e. throw galaxies around. Just moving them around like Minecraft blocks and creating life from nothing. Their FTL methods were described as leaving lingering multiversal residue when they entered real space again. I have no idea what the hell that means, but I'm going to assume that means they just waltz through other realities to reach their destination like a goddamn nether portal system. And there's my favorite invention of theirs as well, star roads. Now that sounds kinda boring, I admit. What they were roads between planets and potentially even different star systems, miles and miles thick and immune to all forms of attack. Let the scale of that sink in a bit, a road between a star system. Not like a Stellaris hypertravel lane, a physical thing. These things stretch between planets. That's something billions of miles long, and these things were everywhere. They could also change their mass at will. Not as in they could shed bits of themselves as required, so they were lighter or heavier. One section of the road might be 100 pounds 1 minute, the next is 10,000, and then after that it's 10. Nothing about the road was changed, there was no rearrangement. Reality has been rewritten, so this thing is now a different mass. That shows a complete mastery of the universe like no other, because it's just rewriting reality on a whim. And while the Precursors didn't really use them for violence, the Flood used them to strangle planets. They did that with the first arc the Forerunners built, which was itself bigger than the one in Halo 3, which was in turn itself several dozen times the size of a planet. Imagine being some Forerunner just chilling out on a planet, living life, then the galactic Autobahn comes screaming out of space and strangles your planet into a black hole before smacking your fleet out of orbit like a game of whack-a-mole. And the domain I discussed in the Forerunner video was their creation. They They wanted to store all they had gathered about the universe in one giant sentient supercomputer that used the very Milky Way galaxy to run itself. Aside from doubtlessly being able to run Doom, it was also able to shut out those it didn't like. This is why the Forerunners, despite being able to access whatever they put into it, noticed massive blank spots of information they couldn't access. The domain itself was telling them to go to hell, they just didn't realize it. Now, if they were so powerful, how did they disappear like all ancient precursor civilizations do? Well, the Forerunners wiped them out. So how did they do that? Great question. There are several answers presented, and none of them come from a completely reliable source. What I can tell you isn't true is what the Forerunners largely believed. They thought the precursors peacefully faded away and left them in charge. That theory is historical revisionism to the highest that Forerunner commanders spread after they murdered all the precursors to make Forerunners feel good about themselves. After this one, though, the theories get screwy. A precursor survivor, and I use that term very loosely, says that the Forerunners attacked them unprovoked. Imagine if every single insect in your backyard suddenly marched into your room and started devouring you. That's essentially what this kind of precursor said had happened. Doesn't matter how strong you are if you're 110% blindsided. Meanwhile, Forerunner accounts by those who actually know a bit about what happened say that instead of passing the role of guardians of all life onto the Forerunners, they were going to give it to humanity instead and genocide the Forerunners out of existence. In this version of the story, the Forerunners just got the jump on them before they could do it. So using that insect analogy again, imagine it's largely the same, only the bugs got wind that you were going to call an exterminator in a few days. There's also the possibility that many precursors simply let the Forerunners kill them because of that whole life is both joy and suffering thing they had going. Whatever the case, the specifics are both incredibly violent and lost to time, as shown by when the Didact found out just what they could do and he freaked out and wondered how the hell the Forerunners ever beat them. Of course, this was still a race of Lovecraftian beings that only technically aren't gods. Kind of hard to kill them. And indeed, at least a few of them retreated out of the Milky Way in some form or another. One of the forms many of them took was as a powder that would eventually coalesce back into precursors proper. But be it the ravages of time or sabotage, something happened to this powder and it was corrupted. Instead of reforming the precursors, it created a new form of life that was hell-bent on revenge, one that would assimilate all into itself so that never again could its creations rise up against it. This powder, as you've no doubt guessed, became the Flood. The Warhammer scenario is coming soon, I promise, but to explain the Flood, imagine the Tyranids, okay? Now instead of them just eating you, they shove a toddler-sized ball of popcorn in your chest and you become one of them. Everything you know of value is then assimilated into the hive mind of the Flood. Everything useless to them is discarded. Not shoved to the back of your mind, not moved around in your neurons, gone. Deleted. Error 404. Fond childhood memories of your mother not found. The novelization of Combat Evolved shows Captain Keyes going through this as he desperately dredges up memories from his past that the Flood has to go through before it can find the location of Earth, as well as him constantly repeating his military identification number over and over so he always has something to use as a shield to almost keep sane. As they grow in number, they begin harvesting corpses to form a grave mind, the true guiding intelligence of the Flood, an intelligence far beyond any AI. If there is anything remotely biological, the Flood can consume it. While there are beings in Halo that cannot be infected by the Flood due to lacking a central nervous system, most prominently the Hunters, their biomass can still be absorbed and used by it. All of your secrets are learned, all of your tactics, your battle plans that you're aware of, how your logistical networks run, everything. To get back to Halo, when this powder came back, ancient humanity decided to give it to their pets to make them more attractive and fertile. I fucking wish I was kidding. I mean, is that not the first thing you think of, too? Oh wow, look at this cool mushroom I found in the forest. Hey, Fido, come lick it for me. I think it'll give me some real cute puppies. Halo lore gets weird, man. Then their puppies started getting a little silly, just a little bit wacky. Then space zombies happened, and ancient humanity and their allies, the ancient prophets, just gonna skip past that without explaining it, no time, waged war on the Flood. When it spread to Forerunner planets, they started getting rid of those planets. For some reason, they didn't explain that there was a zombie apocalypse going on in ancient Forerunner society, so they thought humanity was just randomly invading them for shits and giggles. Humanity fights a two-front war and loses, the Flood pretend to be driven off so the Forerunners think they're secure to the Flood, and then they hardcore prank the Forerunners by revealing that no, there's not a thing like that before reactivating all of their dormant tech to wipe the Forerunners out. And it nearly worked. As the Forerunners were losing ground, the Flood's absorption capabilities meant that they learned more and more about Forerunner tech, as well as how to use and counter it. Every killed Forerunner was another Flood to worry about, classic zombie stuff. And eventually, the Flood hit critical mass and formed a key mind. If a grave mind is smart, a key mind makes Tzeentch look like Gork and Mork. It is the ultimate intelligence, capable of guiding the Flood across the galaxy simultaneously and infecting space-time itself. Yeah, the Flood have their own form of chaos corruption if you let them get out of control. As they devoured huge swaths of the galaxy, the Forerunners also learned the hard way that the Flood could control the tech they had as precursors, and that's when Forerunner planets started getting strangled by those fancy star roads. Even their AIs became infected. Remember what I said about them being smart? The key mind is so bullshit intelligent that they just corrupt machines machines despite it being purely biological. The main Forerunner AI in charge of the military, Metacont Bias, was turned to their side after being locked in the science fiction hyperbolic time chamber with a grave mine for a few years. So don't think you're safe just because you've replaced your lungs with a forge below tech priests. As for how the Flood were defeated, it was because the Halo air raid was almost accidentally designed to utilize neural physics for its firing sequence, which turned all those fancy precursor weapons into soup. It also killed everything left alive in the galaxy by that point, which meant the Flood were starved out, much like the Tyranids would have been in this situation. Unrelated, but there was a bit in the Forerunner novels where, right as the rings are being activated, the Isodidact hears the signals of a race that was just beginning to reach the stars, which is both incredibly depressing and incredibly funny. Imagine you move into a new neighborhood, and the day after you finish setting everything up, you walk outside to go say hi to your new neighbors and immediately get hit with the spirit bomb. Alright, I feel like there's more I can say, but I'm over 8 pages of script into the video and I haven't started the actual Warhammer crossover bit. Didn't plan on this video just being half Halo lore, but here we are. So, how would the Flood fare in the 40k galaxy? I won't be doing the precursors themselves as they were, because to be frank, I think it'd just be a guaranteed win for them. They'd leave the galaxy and toss another one at it. If they failed, they'd do it again and again and again. Or just create a race with the sole purpose of influencing the warp and creating their own chaos god, if not outright descending themselves to become a new race of the old ones. More so than they already were anyways. Now if you look at the title of this video, which I assume you did, you probably noticed the big glaring could in the title. Because unlike the Covenant and Forerunners, I don't think the Flood is guaranteed to either hold their ground or sweep the galaxy. They could do either, but to show what I mean, let's start with Scenario 1. The Flood gets wiped from the galaxy pretty quickly. Let's start the scenario off on an Imperial world. Doesn't matter much which it is. Don't worry about how it got there, it's not important. It shut off a Flood ship on their way across the multiverse to go curb stomp some Forerunner or something. Don't think about it. What's important is what it's gonna do, namely infect some poor schmuck on his way to work or something like that. Could be a hive world, could be an agri world, doesn't matter. Rapidly, the Flood begins to infect others as it does. It can spread through spores in the atmosphere as well as the popcorn balls. It's just that either for technical or balancing reasons, it never does this in the Halo games, if only so the Arbiter doesn't get turned into a zombie when he shows up to give you a lift out of high charity in Halo 3. But that does mean that even if you don't get caught by infection forms, you're still joining their ranks when the air turns to cancer. Now, taking into account both the Flood's capabilities and my intense favoritism of Halo, I'm gonna say this scenario is in the middle of the three in terms of which is most likely to happen. It also relies heavily on one thing: competent Imperial officials. As the Flood infects more and more people, someone important realizes that shit is about to hit the fan hard if this problem isn't taken care of quickly. Let's say there's an Inquisitor like Amberley Vale or Cryptoman in the system while the outbreak is happening. The Flood are many things, and they can be subtle on a grand level. After all, the Foreigners didn't really know about the Flood's true capabilities at first, and weren't really aware of it at all when the humans and prophets were trying to take care of it. That being said, on the local level, it is anything but subtle. You can't hide a Flood infection. I mean, look at this thing. This doesn't exactly fit in with the Imperium's ideal of the holy human form, now does it? Unless I missed something in the 9th edition core rules that says Taco Bell diarrhea is now considered sacred. As the parasite spreads across the planet, Someone Important manages to order what needs to be done: exterminatus of the planet. Doesn't really matter what kind of bomb you use, either way, the end result is that the planet is bathed in fire and the Flood perish alongside everyone on the planet with it. An anticlimactic end to the galaxy's greatest threat. I say this could happen because unlike the Covenant and Forerunners, who are not only advanced but also established powers, the Flood in this case start off with basically nothing. The potential to create and tap into their hive mind intelligence exists in every single Flood spore. And indeed, despite them being almost completely eliminated in the Forerunner Flood War, the Gravemind in Halo seems to have perfect memories of it. So clearly there's something psychic going on with their intelligence, but nevertheless they have to go through a fairly lengthy process to actually reach it. Starting off with nothing but a single spore, it's entirely possible that the Imperium could deal with it before it reaches critical mass. Additionally, the UNSC and Covenant are capable of preventing it from reaching truly galactic proportions. It has been able to wrong foot all factions in Halo before, but if a shotgun can keep a combat form down, then a bolter certainly can as well. This scenario is also more or less likely depending on which world the Flood starts on, of course. Worlds like Hive worlds, while having a much higher amount of people to infect on it, also have a higher chance of attracting the attention of someone with a planet killer. When half of a hive suddenly looks like the worst kind of person at a convention smells like, you're gonna notice. Same goes for if they end up on a Tau world. I don't think the greater good is likely to include the Flood in it. Trying to infect the Craft Lord Eldar initially would lead to them being sensed out and Darth Sidious to death most likely. They would probably have a field day with the orcs, to be totally honest with you. While the average boy could certainly take on a combat form, it's the matter of them getting infected. And truth be told, in my opinion, I think the Flood spores are going to be able to outfight the orc spores, or however you want to word that. If I have to explain to you why the Flood wouldn't get anywhere with a tomb world, then please kindly direct your attention to the nearest wall and headbutt it until the neurons in your brain realign themselves. And as for them spawning in a Tyranid-infested planet, honestly, it could go either way. The Flood could doubtlessly absorb slain Tyranid bioforms. I mean, when they're dead, they're just meat. Hell, infecting dead corpses is a valid way of gaining soldiers and biomass/intelligence for a Gravemind as far as the Flood care. But as for living Tyranids, I'll leave that up to whatever you want to think. Maybe the Flood can infect them like any other, maybe the Tyranids can't be infected, maybe they can, but the Tyranids might be able to combat it or adapt to it. Up to you, and your answer to this question determines how likely the Flood can spread in this scenario. And there's always a couple of ways other factions could hinder the Flood at this stage as well. The Flood can't infect demons any more than the Tyranids can eat them, so if this first Flood spore spawns on a planet that's having a chaotic problem, it probably won't end well for the Flood. And if the Flood are really unlucky, the Necrons might catch wind of the Flood spreading on an Imperial world and use that fancy Star Destroyer button they have. System goes supernova before the Flood spreads, Necrons are laughing the whole time. Did you know it's more like a galactic yard churmer than a weapon? Neat stuff. Entirely unrelated, but I felt like throwing that in there for you. Now for scenario 2, the Flood are able to become another faction in Warhammer, not stomping, but not advancing much like everyone else in the setting. Now this one I'll go ahead and say is the least likely in my opinion, but for the fun of it, I'll talk about the situation. Much the same as the first, but there's no intelligent and or trigger-happy Inquisitor around to blow the Flood-infested planet to Kingdom Come. The Flood takes over the world and begins spreading across the local sector. Fleets are dispatched to halt the spread and eliminate the threat, but the Imperium underestimates the capabilities of the Flood. Each regiment sent to combat them just ends up joining their ranks. And as the Flood grows more in numbers, its intelligence rises in equal measure. Tactics of those sent to face it are memorized and dealt with as they come up anew. Eventually, a slew of planets are firmly under Flood control, infested beyond repair and never to be reclaimed. However, in the scenario, the Flood comes to a halt after an initial surge of growth. Once the Imperium and other races of the galaxy become accustomed to the threat, they learn a few key things. 1. For the love of God, eliminate any ships with Flood on them that are inbound. Security is going to need to be tightened to hell and back, and you better get used to shooting ships coming out of Flood-contested systems on sight, but it can theoretically be done. 2. If they land on a world, devote every bit of resources you have to eliminating them, assuming you can't just blow it up. There is no threat higher than a Flood infestation on a planet, and if they show up, you need to eliminate that entire area. Even in Halo 3, when the UNSC was down to pretty much just Earth, they were willing to let half of Africa get glass because the Flood was just that much of a risk. 3. If the planet looks like it's going to be a goner, just nuke the entire thing. While it'd be incredibly difficult to manage, it's entirely possible that the Flood would become just another faction in the 40k setting if proper containment is followed. Containment in the traditional sense, of course, not containment in the destroy the entire galaxy with giant hula hoops sense. Funnily enough, this is one of those threats that might cause some of the factions to show some unity with each other. Much like the Tyranids, I see no reason the Tau and Imperium wouldn't work together against the Flood, same with the Eldar. Hell, if it was bad enough, maybe it'd even be like with the War of the Beasts, where Iron Warriors and Imperial Fists fought alongside one another. That'd be wild. Now, I say this is the least likely situation to happen because the Flood in my mind aren't really a threat you can stall like this. You can either get rid of them or you're getting turned into fungal stew. Since they're not only going to gain numbers and intelligence, but knowledge of whatever they're infecting, as proved by how they could drive vehicles of the Covenant and UNSC no problem, as well as hijack Forerunner ships, you'll have a major problem where once they hit critical mass, there's no stopping them. For some reason, Google Docs auto-corrected critical mass to critical ass, which isn't important at all, but it made me chuckle, so I thought I'd let you all know that happened. Anyways, this critical mass problem is the same as in any zombie-related media. Granted, most zombies can't clear buildings in a single jump and outmath Isaac Newton, but it's the same problem of after a certain point, the apocalypse is coming by sheer weight of numbers. As for their intelligence, absorbing a million guardsmen might not tell them anything important. They might gain some colorful new words to call the regimental commissar, but that's it. But they still gain the intelligence of all those guardsmen added on top of one another for the Gravemind. Additionally, absorb the right tech priest and they know all about how the weapons they're facing and absorbing work. Absorb the right officer and you've got knowledge of the Imperial tactical and strategic plans for the area at that man's time of death. And do I really need to tell you why a Flood-infected and enhanced Space Marine would be bad news for anyone in a light-year radius? Though for all my talk of this being the most unlikely scenario, this is the one that would be the coolest with the Flood in as an army in 40k, since they certainly got the potential to be a kick-ass army. Flood pure forms would be fantastic models, and imagine something on tabletop like the Flood carrier form. You send one or two of them into a unit of guardsmen, and if all goes well, you can infect them to your side. Imagine how cool of an army that would be. One that might start off weak, but can absorb the enemy into their side to turn the tide. Imagine the arrogant face of someone who brings a titan to the game board. Now imagine that smug grin being wiped off as a swarm of popcorn models clamber over the thing and infect everyone in it and turn it against them. That would be cool. I don't care if it's unbalanced. It'd be fucking awesome, wouldn't it? Now, scenario 3, the one that is both the situation I think is most likely and the one that is going to once more rear accusations of me being a biased Halo fan. To address that second one first, yes. Now let the jerking off of Halo commence.
This is not your grave.
Flood begins on a planet and completely devours it. Unlike Scenario 1, the Imperium or Tau or whoever is in charge cannot eradicate the threat, and it begins rapidly spreading across the sector. Aside from them gaining strength in numbers as they grow, the main issue is their assimilation. Everything they assimilate not only gives them that creature's abilities and knowledge, but enhances their strength and agility as well. It's how a standard UNSC Marine that's infected can slap the Master Chief across the map despite him being a goddamn demigod of war. Additionally, them being perfectly able to use the tech of a race they assimilate means that if you don't eliminate the Flood with an army you send after them, they're going to know how to deal with you after the fact. The Flood hive mind begins as a proto-gravemind, a largely defenseless blob creature. That being said, once one of these things are formed, the Flood vastly increases in intelligence and it will undoubtedly make itself impossible to reach, or at least as close to impossible as it can, therefore ensuring the Flood's intellectual capabilities rise alongside their physical ones. As for how a single Flood spore can grow to take over a whole species, it's the same way as every zombie thing ever, their exponential growth. 1 begets 2, begets 4, begets a whole fucking lot more. I think the Imperium's massive scale would screw them over in this case, in both the large scale and the small scale. In the small scale, I mean that literally in the case of all the big shit that they build. Imagine a single Flood spore getting into a knight. With just a single infection form or airborne spore, the Flood have a death machine. Now scale that up to a Titan legion. Much like Nurgle and the Tyranids to some extent, they create a biosphere to spread themselves with. It even looks like a Nurglite chaos infection, funnily enough. All sick and gross and nasty ass looking. So any guardsmen deployed to a Flood infested world might just find themselves feeding the Gravemind. The Flood also have their own pure forms that are more than capable of holding their own in a fight. You've got Stalkers, the ranged things they turn into that shoot needles at you, the Flood tank, and of course the Flood Juggernaut. It was cut from Halo 2, and that's probably for the best because beating that thing on Legendary would make me cry. The Boulevard of Jackal snipers is already bad enough, but in terms of Warhammer, this thing is more of a damn dreadnought. It's the size of one and it hits like one. On top of all the other crap they got from Halo Wars 2, I mean, look at these things. Ugh. Just to go a bit more into their infectious capabilities I mentioned earlier, it's important to remember that Forerunner AIs are fully sentient artificial people, at least in terms of how advanced they are. If the Flood can infect those, I see no reason the Flood would have any issues infecting machine spirits once it devotes effort to it. They might not even need to infect the pilot of a Knight or Titan, for instance, just its machine spirit. And if nothing else, part of the reason Medican Bias was corrupted by the Flood is because the Keymind convinced him to turn against the Forerunners. Some machine spirits are pretty damn close to just being AI if they aren't already, and the Flood mind is so goddamn charismatic that it can convince them to betray the Imperium. This charisma naturally being helped by a healthy dose of corruption. And if you're thinking that something like this might take a while, remember the Flood are capable of infecting space-time itself. Even if it were to be the case that the Keymind has to individually talk to every single Titan spirit for years on end, that's not as much of a problem when the year-long conversation takes place over the course of about 5 minutes. And depending on how prevalent machine spirits truly are, the Imperium is even more fucked. A lot of what the Imperium calls machine spirits are actually just something like programs and stuff, like a computer nowadays, so that's not that big of an issue. The Flood can probably infect it with ye olde computer virus and make it not work, but that's just a single piece of equipment not working. Oh well. But if the other end of that scale is true, and AI is truly a part of almost every major piece of Imperial equipment, the Flood may very well kickstart a second Men of Iron rebellion. And as far as things like servitors go, they can just infect those the old-fashioned way of popcorn ball to the spinal column. That's a computer and a person infected all at once. Just eat the guy plugged into the battleship's navigation system and you've not only got yourself a pilot, you know how to pilot every other ship of its type. As the Flood infest more and more of space, they only become more and more powerful. There's no spreading themselves out too thin here. Much like the Tyranids, the Flood hive mind can be directing an entire battlefield all at once. However, it's much harder to disrupt the Keymind's presence amongst the Flood. There's far less in the way of synapse creatures amongst the Flood, so you can't just shoot the big one and the Flood all turn into mindless beasts. At best, you can destroy the Gravemind overseeing the Flood, but there's a couple of problems with that. Problem 1, the Gravemind doesn't even need to be on the same planet to direct the Flood, and a Keymind undoubtedly has an even larger range as well. Problem 2, the Gravemind is minimum the size of a damn Titan. Some things I've read say its body might be hundreds of kilometers large, and if that's the case, nothing short of an orbital bombardment is killing that thing. Either way, you're gonna need some big guns to kill it. Problem 3, it's not just a giant blob. A proto-Gravemind is, but a Gravemind proper isn't, and in this scenario, the Flood are long past the stage of proto-Gravemind. A Gravemind, meanwhile, can launch things across space if it needs to. As in, pick up a Flood combat form, stuff it in a fleshy drop pod, and just catapult that bitch across the solar system. It does it in Halo 3 pretty frequently in the last level. Aside from that meaning that it can theoretically spread infections across the system it's in without even needing to send any proper Flood combat forms there, there's the much more direct issue of if it can do that, anything that tries to fight it is going to be turned into a Dark Souls bloodstain real goddamn quickly. Good luck fat rolling around this thing. As for the larger scale working against the Imperium, the Flood absorb their enemies as they do. The problem this poses for the the Imperium is that there's a whole lot of people to infect. And as I keep saying, everyone infected is another Imperial that's now working against it. It's kind of like how in the World War Z book, China kept throwing men at zombies, not knowing that every time they lost a man, they gained a zombie to fight. Or rather, not really caring, which I doubt the Imperium would either, given that it's the Imperium. Hell, if the Flood begins somewhere in the Ghoul Stars or another region of space uncharted to the Imperium, it might grow to critical mass, and then suddenly entire swaths of Imperial space are under attack by the parasite. Additionally, the Flood are more than capable of figuring out how to repurpose equipment to suit itself, and in the case of 40k, there is a lot of hive worlds, forge worlds, and more that can be taken over to produce armaments and ships for the Flood. Once the know-how of doing this is figured out by the hive mind, it's endless supplies of stuff for the Flood to produce to help their war effort. War effort, never-ending buffet, same difference, you know? And something I think is pretty neat is that I think it's likely the Flood will produce the exact same issue as a Tyranid hive fleet invasion, the Shadow of the Warp. It is, after all, a massively complex and overreaching intelligence stretching across time and space. Who's to say that the Flood can do the same thing as the Nids in this case? Albeit against the Flood, the Psychers go insane because some asshole won't stop speaking in iambic pentameter at them every time they try to use magic. No matter what the Imperium throws at the Flood, in this scenario it can't be stopped. World after world falls to it until they have devoured the majority of the Imperium, and mankind's fate is sealed along with the rest of the galaxy. The ever-present orcs will only present more food and soldiers for the Flood. The schemes of the Eldar are no match for the intelligence of the Keymind. Clearly, the Tau will survive and repopulate the galaxy, and I can't even finish this joke. They get stomped. Straightforward. Space and time itself will begin to corrupt itself into a living hell, potentially preventing demons from manifesting in real space. This same issue will also plague the Tyranids. If space and time are absolutely Smeckledorf, then the Tyranids' travel across the galaxy can be splintered and disrupted enough to make them easy pickings. Regardless, as industrial centers fall and armies are infected, the Flood will have more than enough manpower to handle Tyranid hive fleets. Kamara and the Black Library likely won't even be safe, as the moment a Webway Gate is found, it's time to go ballistic with the Flood spores. Even the forces of chaos will be forced to bow to the unending tide of the parasite pouring across the galaxy, with cultists and marines being infected and turned while demons are gunned down by their former servants. As for the endgame, the Flood will begin to finish with the rest of the holdouts amongst the galaxy. Depending on how powerful the Flood's absorption really is, there's a very real chance they might develop Psyker powers, in which case the precursors as they were are back now, just a lot grosser. You may say that being the god that he is, the Emperor could handle the Flood, and individually, of course that's true, there's no Flood form that'll manage to harm him. But as a god, he is weakened as his worshippers die off, and as the Flood consumes more and more, not only will he lose worshippers that deprive him of power, which to note is the same issue the Chaos Gods will face, he will also receive less and less Psychers to empower him. The daily dose of Psychers he needs to sustain himself will dwindle from the thousands, to the hundreds, to the dozens, to finally none. The end of the Imperium in this scenario may not come from a Flood invasion of Terra, but a warp storm as he finally dies and chaos overtakes the cradle of man. As for the Necrons, you might think they'll be the inheritors of the galaxy, as robotic beings should be relatively safe, but this won't be so. The average Necron warrior could potentially be infected by the Flood's logic plagues they use to infect the machinery of other races. Even disregarding that, the Flood aren't just predators like the Tyranids, they're hateful, they want an unending hell of subjugation for all life. And the Necrons, while not technically alive anymore, are not likely to be spared the wrath of the insane remnants of the precursors. As the Flood takes over the industrial centers of other realms, it will turn them towards the Necrons to eliminate them. It will learn the secrets of the Necrons' ultimate weapons and turn them against not only them, but the Catan, some of the only beings capable of threatening them that in their sharded state will be easy pickings for a massed Flood invasion. As the last of the mortal beings in the galaxy are consumed, on multiple levels it becomes an unrecognizable hell. Not only are infected planets turned into Flood worlds covered in their biomass, but space and time itself warp beyond recognition. The library in the Forerunner trilogy mentions that looking at the stars, they looked off somehow. Whatever the Flood were doing as they were wiping out the Forerunners, they were causing the galaxy to become wrong on a fundamental level. However they managed to do it, the end result is the galaxy becoming something closer to hell than anything we would know. Physics are entirely rewritten, much like how their star roads could rewrite reality to change their mass, and life may very well become impossible. Any chaotic incursions attempting to combat the Flood are dealt with easily, either by the unending tide of combat forms banishing them back to the warp, or because once in real space demons need to at least somewhat follow the laws of physics, the Flood can simply rewrite these laws to be to their advantage. The Eye of Terror will more than likely end up closed, as will the Great Rift, whether that be due to the Flood being able to build something similar to the Necron pylons, or the sheer psychic weight of the Flood hive mind shutting it down like the Tyranid shadow in the warp. Either way, the end result is the same. As the last of their followers and mortal beings they draw sustenance from are infected, the Chaos Gods begin to wither and fade. The 40k galaxy is subsumed into the Flood. It may have taken another 40,000 years from the days of the Human Covenant War, and 140,000 years from when they nearly consumed the galaxy the first time around, but their victory is inevitable.
We exist together now.
Two corpses in one grave.
And with that, I am done with the 3 Halohammer videos. I do hope you've all enjoyed the video series, as it was very fun to write and make. As I've said many a time, I love me some Halo. And even if you hated it, well, you can always make fun of me elsewhere on the internet, or in the comment section. I don't advise that one for your sake, because it'll just boost me in the algorithm and keep my garbage opinions I hate so much floating around, but if you really want to let me know how unbelievably stupid I am for these videos, then go for it. Don't think I'm done with Halo yet, of course. There's all sorts of lore videos about them I'd love to make. Between this series and the one about the Human Covenant War, it's been proven to me that people will watch it. I think next time I dive into Halo, we'll take a look at your friendly neighborhood office of naval intelligence. They do some shit the Imperium would say is too much, but that'll be sometime in the future. This was quite the long video, as you can probably tell, so I'll be taking a break from Halo for now. Not for too long, of course, but long enough to get back to what you expect from a Warhammer channel. You know, Warhammer, and maybe some stuff about a phone company, if I have time. Alright, now hear me out. Gravemind, right? Big scary monster, hateful and manipulative beyond belief, wants nothing more than to consume all life in the galaxy. I bet, and again, hear me out, he gives the sloppiest toppy in the universe. Absolute mad head game, that good old Gluck Gluck 3000. You might say that's bad. I say that's probably not even the top 5 most shameful things I've said on this channel. I know what can make that list though. Gravemind Dussy. Nah, I can do better than that. Fladussy. Wait. Precussy. Well, everyone, people kept asking for it, and I'm more than happy to keep talking about Halo, so here it is. The UNSC and 40k. I'm sure you're expecting me to do what I did in the last 3 videos, which is break my wrist fluffing Halo off. And to be sure, I'm gonna do that as much as I still can. I have my objectively correct bias, after all. But I had to do some creative thinking for this video, which, to be honest, was pretty fun. I went into the other ones with the perspective that Halo would stomp, at least for the Forerunners and Flood, and figured that the Covenant was roughly equal. I still think that, by the way. The UNSC, though, not a stomp at all, at least not one against 40k. Humanity from Halo was a bit of an issue standing firm against everyone else in this setting, I will not lie to you. Pretty far behind in tech, very far behind in manpower and industry relative to everyone else. Things don't look great for them. With that being said, it's still an interesting scenario to think about for me. Instead of just going through all the reasons these factions would stomp, I had to think of some ways that the UNSC could possibly fit into 40k as a setting. Can it be done? I think so, yeah. So let's get going already. I'm burning sunshine with this opening paragraph. Right, now it's time to do some Halo stuff. Let's do some history. By that, of course, I mean Halo lore. Now sit down and pay attention. This is what gets me going right here. If you want to skip ahead to the scenarios, make sure to use the video chapters to just go right ahead. The UNSC was formed in 2163 as the military arm of the United Nations in space, as well as that of the United Earth government. Initially, the UEG was just an overseeing body, and then it turned into the planetary government of all of Earth and more. That's what UNSC stands for if you never looked it up. United Nations Space Command. UNSC also stands for United Nations Security Council, which is a real thing, and at least one news station has used the UNSC logo from Halo during a broadcast. It was formed during a time known as the Interplanetary War, when both communism and fascism experienced a bit of a resurgence across the solar system. The UNSC put down these movements or rebellions or whatever you want to call them, and the UNSC was here to stay from here on out. To make things brief, since this isn't strictly speaking a UNSC lore video, it and the many soldiers making it up expanded alongside the rest of humanity for nearly 500 years, until the end of the 25th century, where humanity had colonized roughly 800 worlds. Scientific advancement had been going along quite well, although in a lot of ways it's rather skewed with what did advance and what didn't. For example, UNSC medical tech is so good that it allows cancer to be cured by the onboard medbay of some random merchant vessel. This happens in one of the books, and it's at least somewhat implied that this isn't abnormal by any means. Cloning is very much possible, although very imperfect, and in fact there's a drug that temporarily brings people up to essentially being mini-Spartans. Granted, the drug also starts short-circuiting your internal organs, so probably not the best idea to start overdosing on that one. On the other hand of technological advancement, the standard UNSC assault rifle, the assault rifle, uses 7.62 rounds. Thank you to every single one of you who left me a comment correcting me that the UNSC does not use 5.56, they use 7.62. It was really informative, especially by the 500th comment telling me the UNSC used 7.62 rounds and not 5.56. Did you know the UNSC uses 7.62 and not 5.56 in their weapons? Because the UNSC uses 7.62 rounds and not 5.56. Remember, the UNSC uses 7.62 and not 5.56. Are you annoyed yet? Has the joke gone on too long that the UNSC uses 7.62 and not 5.56? Good. Fuck you. But yeah, UNSC tech advanced in weird ways. They also have fully sapient artificial intelligences, which you better believe I'll be talking about later. By the end of the 25th century and the beginning of the 2500s, an independence movement called the Insurrectionists among the outer colonies had been causing more and more trouble for the UNSC. In fact, the Spartan IIs were initially created to deal with these people. Yeah, the kidnapped children weren't even a desperate last-ditch effort to stop extinction. They were going to throw them at terrorists. I guess that was technically just ONI and not the UNSC at large, to be fair, but that's small comfort to everyone involved with the project. Thank you for your crimes against humanity, Catherine Halsey. At the very least, we got some cool video games out of it. Of course, before they invented the Spartans, they just nuked an entire colony world to bring it to heel, so pick your poison, I guess. Just goes to show the ages-old saying is correct. Never ask a man his salary, a woman her age, and the UNSC what happened at Far Isle in 2492. Around this time, the Covenant shows up, and it did not go well for the UNSC. What follows is just under 3 decades of the UNSC getting its shit pushed in. They won isolated engagements, but rarely, usually on the ground, and always at great cost. Some of the comments on the other Halo videos mentioned how the UNSC was regularly winning ground battles. Given that in the Halo games you're playing as either the Master Chief or an RTS like Halo Wars, where everyone needs to be roughly equal for balance's sake, it's understandable to think that, but unfortunately it's just not true. It's more like the UNSC only lost 80% of ground battles compared to 95% of space battles. And those ground battles didn't ultimately mean anything anyways most of the time, because the Covenant would just glass the planet and all the people on it before moving on. So that's the rough history you need to know. I'm being a bit more brief with their history than the other factions, because I think the Forerunner and Flood needed a bit more explanation to really put focus on how strong they actually are. But the UNSC, well, Halo isn't exactly a niche franchise. You're probably roughly aware of what the UNSC is and the weapons it has available to it, at least on the ground. I'm going to talk about some of their hardest hitting stuff just to show that they can kind of stand up in the setting, but not right now. There's some stuff I want to cover first. Anyways, UNSC and 40k. How's that going to go? Badly. Badly for the UNSC. I mentioned earlier that I was thinking of some interesting ways for how the UNSC could fit in. That's because in a pitched battle, the UNSC is getting its shit rocked. To put it simply, I think the Covenant could hold their ground in 40k without either going to town or getting destroyed. The Covenant were destroying the UNSC. By the magic of the transitive property, the 40k factions are going to destroy the UNSC. I mean, imagine the standard UNSC Marine from Halo 3, or any of the games really. Yeah, it's the army in Reach, but same difference. Now take that Marine and put him up against an Orc. He's going to get his arms ripped off, and then the Orc is going to use them to beat his comrades to death. Tragically for the UNSC, a large majority of what it brings to the table would be inadequate to say the least. In pitched battles, it's going to go much like it did with the Covenant. Maybe a bit more successfully, because enough bullets will eventually take down the moronic Space Marines charging headfirst into a machine gun nest, but there's a lot of Space Marines to shoot at, and they're pretty good at eating bullets long enough to kill the guy shooting at them. So if any faction in 40k can be bothered enough, they can take care of the UNSC pretty quickly. I mean, the Eldar would have a field day in all sorts of ways. I mean, in a setting where magic exists, the UNSC doesn't really have any psychers, or anything like that, really. So there's your most likely scenario. The UNSC explodes. But that's not terribly fun, so let's make a deal between ourselves. You can all go forward in this video with the knowledge that I said the UNSC would most likely get mollywomped in the 40k universe. In exchange, I'm going to spend the rest of the video crafting the few scenarios in which it wouldn't, as well as covering a few of the super weapons it has to at least let them go down swinging. Sound fair? Well, it really doesn't matter if it's fair or not. I'm not actually talking to you. This is a recorded video that you could be watching years after it went up. I don't know you, I'm not your friend. As far as things go, I'm not actually speaking to anyone. Just a microphone while I'm looking at a script. The avatar on screen isn't me that you're looking at, it's my Lore Crimes podcast avatar. This conversation functionally doesn't matter, because it isn't a conversation, and the video will go on anyways. But I'm gonna pretend it's a fair deal, because I think it is. There's my olive branch. Also go leave comments on Lore Crimes telling them to let me do Halo lore. While you're wondering if what I just said counts as a parasocial relationship or not, let me talk about the UNSC's fun stuff. Let's get the big one out of the way first. Let's talk Spartans. 2s and 3s specifically, although yeah, I guess the 4s do exist. I'll rip the band-aid off now. I think a Spartan could take a Space Marine in a 1v1. In fact, I think depending on the chapter, I think they can take multiple Space Marines. That was a Versus episode on Lore Crimes actually, so go check that out when you're done watching the video. Play this and that video side by side actually, get the full schizophrenia experience. Much of the reason I think this is not because I think the Spartans' augmentations are wholesale better than the Astartes. In many ways I do think they're better because Halo's got a lot more solid feats to go off of, but the Spartans also can't, say, spit acid or eat people's brains to get their memories. The reason I think this is because the average Space Marine is a bit of a meathead when it comes to fighting. They're warriors, not soldiers. They have their own codes of honor and infight, and they're basically medieval monks crossed with a knightly order. Groups of them also fall into pretty predictable niches. Sure, you get the Ultramarines and some of their successors as jacks of all trades, but many are very focused on one style of combat, which makes them predictable and exploitable. Blood Angels and Black Templars, for instance, are going to hightail it into melee combat. Imperial Fists are going to sit behind a wall and take potshots at you until you either die or go away. Spartans, meanwhile, of course, have their own specialties. Emil loves his shotguns and knives, Linda is a sniping prodigy, but they're highly proficient in all forms of combat. If you give a Flesh Terror a sniper, he'd probably try to beat someone to death with it. The White Scars can be defeated with a plasma pistol when you overcharge it and hit their bike, so they go careening into the sunset like Team Rocket. When Horus used the Raven Guard for a frontal assault during the Horus Heresy, they suffered grievous casualties because they do not do well at those. Meanwhile, throw a Spartan into any kind of engagement and they'll do just fine. Just for some more general Spartan feats, the Master Chief ran at over 60 miles an hour during a training exercise once and slapped a missile out of the air, and he's not even the fastest Spartan. Them flipping warthogs over in game is also canon, because another Spartan used an ATV like a sledgehammer and pasted a grunt with it. Their marksmanship is unparalleled, their endurance beyond their armor is such that they can go months on end of non-stop campaigning without needing a break, and the Spartan 3 showed us that even the lesser armor they use is rated for atmospheric re-entry. Yeah, the Spartans don't exactly want to be jumping into the atmosphere, but even Vulcan died when he was crashing down on a Macrog. Noble Six just got up and started killing aliens. And of course, while this is only for him, the Master Chief canonically has plot armor. He is said to be the luckiest Spartan, to the point that it's pretty much manifesting in a universe that doesn't have supernatural stuff in it. Precursor stuff notwithstanding. You ever notice how in the Halo games the Master Chief always just happens to find the perfect weapon for the job, or a medpack right when he's a bit low on health? Obviously, yes, this is because it's a video game and the original Halo trilogy is built very well, but it's also canon that these things are happening to him. You think Matt Ward gave the Smurfs plot armor? Theirs is nothing on the Chiefs. His is just, well written. That's not to say the Spartans are going to always flounce the Marines. I know I talked down on them not too long ago, but the Raven Guard especially I can see giving the Spartans problems. Their special ops shtick is something that could easily give the Spartans trouble. I just think the average Space Marine isn't going to fight off a Spartan. I think the Space Marines are roughly equal to them, and the Spartans are a whole lot more practical overall. No weapon or tactic is off the table, because much like the Space Marines, the Spartans are also child soldiers told that the only thing that matters is the mission. Hell, many Space Marines are probably closer to good guys than the average Spartan. They had to stop sending Emil after Insurrectionists because what he'd do to them can only be described as war crime horrific. Since that's the thing that'll probably generate the most hate, let's move on to things that aren't gonna infuriate everyone. Like AI. And more generally, innovation. The UNSC has proven that it is more than capable of reverse engineering superior technology. While it can take some time, like how it took over a decade to recreate energy shields from a Jackal arm shield, it can also be impressively fast, such as how the Infinity had Forerunner tech integrated into it. So the UNSC, while they'd be hurting bad in the meantime and it'd likely not get quickly spread throughout its armed forces, could reproduce the tech of quite a few of the factions on a reasonable time frame. At least with the Tau and Imperium's tech, I'd see no problem with them reverse engineering it. Maybe some of the Necron stuff, but that's a big maybe. It'd also be a lot harder to even get that stuff, since they need to capture Necron equipment, and the Necrons, as a rule of thumb, don't like it when you do that. As for AI, UNSC's smart AI is absolutely brilliant. If there's a technological system, they can learn it in moments and know what to do with it. Now, admittedly, part of this is because Covenant tech is based on Forerunner tech, and despite how advanced that is, humanity was chosen by the Forerunners to succeed them and get all their stuff. But that being said, let me remind you I like Halo more, so I've decided that the AIs in Halo are just cracked. Complete wipe, machine spirits beware, because Cortana's gonna kick your digital ass. Alright, fine, I'll cut the exaggeration. Halo AI certainly isn't perfect. If nothing else, you don't turn them off after 7 years and you get Halo 5. Nobody wants that. But I do think they'd be a crucial edge, because regardless of whatever you think a machine spirit ultimately is, they're undoubtedly not being used to their full potential, as Halo AI are. They also come in dumb varieties, so the UNSC has scaling for this rather than it being either just programming or a digital person. Those ones can learn anything in a specific field, but outside of that field, they can't really do much in the way of figuring things out. Next thing the UNSC has in its favor, the Nova Bomb. There's not much to talk about here. It's a really big bomb. It's got something to do with compressing fissile material with more fissile material, taping nukes together, and then compressing that with even more nuclear material. Somehow this creates a mini-neutron star, which then explodes. Is this even remotely scientifically accurate? Probably not, but I'm tangentially talking about Warhammer here, so that's hardly a concern. Point is, you get a very big boom. One of them was dropped by Grey Team on a colony of elites after the war ended, which of note is not technically a war crime since the war was over. Another was blown up by engineers who fixed the countdown timer, not knowing what the thing really was. One moment, the Covenant fleet in the area numbered 300 ships, quite the total. The next moment, 60% of that fleet was halfway to Andromeda. It also vaporized a quarter of the planet the fleet was stationed over, turned the rest of the planet's surface into a very convincing imitation of hell, and shattered the planet's moon like glass. Are there enough of them to be a game changer? Probably not. But if nothing else, it can force the factions of 40k to learn not to group up their fleets into massive, ungainly battle groups when they're fighting the UNSC. Not unless they want their fleet to suddenly vanish like the world's most explosive magic trick. Hell, just toss it at the Phalanx. Goodbye, Imperial Fists. Or better yet, the Eye of Terror. Goodbye, all traitor Marines. Second to last big thing I want to talk about, because this whole section is just an excuse for me to talk about cool UNSC stuff. Mech cannons. You know, those things you really don't want to fire off.
In atmosphere.
It's basically just a coil gun. A really, really big coil gun. UNSC ships are basically built around them, because they usually run a solid 2/3 of the vessel's length minimum. The ship-based ones are formidable, to be sure, but they would usually take multiple shots to destroy a Covenant ship. UNSC cruisers themselves weren't exactly the toughest things around, so getting multiple shots off usually meant having multiple ships in the area. But the orbital mat cannons, the rounds they fired were roughly 3,000 tons and went at 4% the speed of light. That's 12,000 kilometers a second, or roughly 7,500 miles per second in correct measurement units. When they shot this thing, it wouldn't just destroy a Covenant ship, it'd rip right through it. If there was a ship behind the first one, it'd go through that one as well. It was only if it hit a third ship the round would finally stop, also destroying that final one just in case you were curious. Out of everything the UNSC has that you might think I'm crazy for thinking can stand up to the Warhammer stuff, this is probably the one that's the least contentious. Because in function, it's very simple and easy to understand why it's so deadly. It fires a very big rock very fast. You don't want to be in the way. And finally, before I start writing glorified fanfic for how the scenario could go, another conversation about slipspace. I've made comparisons between slipspace and the warp before, and people counter with how warp travel isn't as meme-worthy as some, myself included, I'll admit, like to make it out to be. And people have said before, and it's proven in canon, that most warp travel in the Imperium doesn't result in demons, or ending up 3,000 years in the past and or future. I admit, this is true. That's how the Imperium is still able to function, more so than all the other things keeping it together. It overall has access to pretty reliable warp travel, even if it's a bit terrifying to transmit between the warp and real space. The thing is, it's reliable on a galactic scale. Let's make a scenario. Let's say a merchant vessel is delivering goods from one world to another. The destination is expected to take roughly 1 month. That vessel is probably making it without any issues. The problem is, it isn't making it in 1 month. It's going to make it there in any amount of time from 2 weeks to 2 months depending on warp currents. On the grand scale, warp travel is incredibly reliable, but once you start getting to the level of individual ships, your schedule is a suggestion, not a statement of fact. That's the true issue with warp travel. Trying to coordinate your invasion fleet on the tactical level can be an absolute nightmare. Half your battle group gets to the destination right on time, and the other half trickles in over the course of a couple of weeks. With slipspace, if the journey is estimated to take 9 days, it's going to take 9 days. If it's going to take a month, it'll take a month. UNSC slipspace travel is overall slower than warp travel. I'm willing to bet on that. But due to its far more reliable nature, it has its own advantage over warp travel that gives the UNSC a slight edge it didn't have against the Covenant. Now that I'm finally done masturbating over UNSC technology, how about I tell you some of the finely crafted narratives I've come up with where the UNSC magically shows up in the 41st millennium. In fact, let's talk about a scenario that I came up first, since it involves a total stomp and it's also kind of funny to think about. Scenario 1. The UNSC gets placed exactly where it is and is just superimposed over the current setting. You know how Terra is just Earth renamed? Well, the UNSC is based around Earth. Just magically replaced Terra with the 20th century Earth from Halo. Big E has vanished from existence, and then the UNSC is dead because the Imperium glasses the entirety of Segmentum's soul. The Imperium crumbles, the UNSC is made past tense in a matter of days. Thank you for coming to this highly thought out video. Now, because that's goofy, let's move on to some slightly less goofy scenarios. Starting with actual scenario 1, the UNSC joins up with the Imperium. Now, there's a couple of things in this situation that can cause issues, but if you hear me out, I'll explain why it might just work. Obviously, they're both human factions, which is a big bonus, and both of them don't exactly have the best opinion of aliens, between humanity being nearly wiped out in Halo and the Imperium being the Imperium. Of course, even Oni's strongest racist has nothing on the Imperium, but it's still something to consider, because at the very least, the UNSC isn't going to need much convincing to dislike Tyranids. And the fact that the UNSC is ancient humanity by 40k standards mean there's a pretty damn good chance the Imperium might even revere them as the beloved ancients come to the modern day. Ancient and reliable tech that the UNSC can understand and produce at will? That seems like the thing the Mechanicus would kill for. In return, the Imperium gives the UNSC a great deal of protection from the horrible threats of the galaxy while it catches up in the tech level, and I'm willing to bet that the UNSC can get some good progress on recreating a lot of the Imperium's lost tech. This is the least interesting option because honestly, it just subsumes the UNSC into the Imperium. I don't think the Imperium is just going to let them be allies. They didn't do that shit in the Great Crusade with other human civilizations, they're probably not going to start now. Maybe the UNSC can start some sort of renaissance within the Imperium, but more than likely, they're just going to make the Imperium better at killing things, whether or not it's a deserved killing. It's a reasonably likely scenario, but also far from guaranteed. The UNSC would probably be down for not getting wiped out, but also probably wouldn't be fine with all the requirements and restrictions the Imperium would force on them like Emperor worship. Given that the UNSC doesn't really have any restrictions on innovation, that would also cause some issues. Also, AI. That's a big no-no for the Imperium. Although with that being said, UNSC smart AI might actually be fine with the Imperium and Mechanicus. In Halo, they're created by copying and replicating the neural patterns of a human brain. If the right person says the right things, smart AI might not only be allowed, but glorified as the ultimate way to live on in the Omnisci's memory. And there may be a small chance that since the UNSC's version of humanity is from the 2500s and not the 40,000s, none of them will show psychic traits. Humanity in 40k, after all, didn't really show that much in the way of large-scale psyker activity prior to the Dark Age of technology. That'd be useful for the Imperium, only because you can look at these guys and assume with reasonable amounts of security that one of these fellas won't explode into a demon. On to the next idea, the UNSC outright goes to war with the Imperium, or at least doesn't join it. This time without me just superimposing them onto their mirror locations in the Imperium. If you're wondering how the specifics of this work, given that once again, they're both humanity in the very far future, the answer is very simple. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about how there's 2 Earths, 2 solar systems. Just pretend that both factions view the others as a false copy or some contrived BS. This whole video is contrived. One more contrivance isn't going to make it any worse. I'm going to stop saying any variation on the word contrived now. The word just sounds Zinchian, doesn't it? And I don't like Zinch much because he does magic different to the elves and therefore wrong. The situation is going to feature most of the scenarios I've come up with, since in my mind, join the Imperium is rather simple in what happens, whereas not joining the Imperium can mean any number of possibilities. Now, this one is overall bad for the UNSC. They're outnumbered, outgunned, out-technologied. It's not looking great. Humanity had to outnumber Covenant ships 3-1 to match evenly in an engagement, and that usually resulted in 2 of those 3 ships exploding. In the name of consistency, because I said the Covenant is roughly equal at the Imperium, and because I will never stop playing favorites, we'll keep that ratio the same. Except the Imperium has a whole lot more ships available to them than the Covenant did. A whole galaxy's worth, in fact, and that's not even including everyone else. Now, Scenario 2, Subsection 1, or however you want to think about it. The UNSC finds itself isolated in the galaxy at first, and has to quickly come to terms with the fact that it is in a universe somehow even worse than the one it just magically came from. If they're in isolation, this gives them time to prepare, and more importantly, a limited ability to pick and choose their battles. While outright invading other factions to gain their secrets and tech is almost certainly well beyond them, remember that 40k is a big, big setting. There's plenty of undiscovered planets humanity once colonized, ships that have been lost in the warp, and all sorts of other reasons for some group or other to be completely isolated from the galaxy at large. And that's just with humanity. Some Necron tomb worlds have gone completely dormant, the treasures within just waiting to be found by whatever people can make it past the ruined defenses. Relics of the Elder Empire that are outside the Eye of Terror, even if unusable by a group of humans, can doubtlessly be used as items of trade or bargaining chips with the Craftworlders. And of course, they can still interact with the galaxy at large, they just gotta be careful with it. For example, Oni agents can go throughout the galaxy as they wish, and funnily enough, they probably wouldn't have any issues speaking with the average humans they find. Low Gothic is just every language ever, with each being called a different dialect, while High Gothic is just butchered Latin. Not exactly hard for Oni translators to figure out. Oni may be evil, but it generally isn't incompetent. Agents traveling to nearby planets can learn in secret what the Imperium and galaxy at large are like, and plan accordingly. Strike teams of ODSTs and Spartans can retrieve scraps of technology for the UNSC to recreate with relative secrecy. And that probably wouldn't stand out much. The funny thing about these groups is that the ODSTs would probably be considered to be wearing nothing more than unique flak armor at most. And while Spartans can take on a Space Marine in my estimation, they certainly don't look like Astartes. They're similar in height, as long as you aren't reading a book by a GW author with a fetish for gigantism, but they're also much thinner with far slimmer armor. And power armor isn't anything new, plenty of unaugmented people wear it in the setting. The local tech priest over wherever they're at will probably want to get their hands on Mjolnir armor as soon as they can, but at first glance the Spartans might not appear to be anything much more than tall folks in power armor. At least until they start swinging. At the very least, you can send Spartans out without people mistaking them for Space Marines because the Spartan program isn't a giant sausage fest. If a planet is isolated enough, the UNSC may even be able to integrate it. Especially in undiscovered space, there's plenty of human colonies that aren't part of the Imperium. Beyond that, there's plenty of planets that are in all but name independent. Tides and trading vessels may only come by every few centuries, if not longer. More than enough time for the UNSC to at the very least build up defenses and learn some tricks to hold back the tide of the galaxy. Being able to recreate lasguns alone, one of the few pieces of Imperial tech that isn't a total mystery to them, would vastly increase the UNSC's firepower. Although some things, if you want me to be honest, they'd probably be better sticking with over the Imperial counterpart. I'd take a Scorpion over a Lehman Russ any day of the week. This general idea is probably the best case scenario for the UNSC I could come up with, because it gives them several legs up they frankly need to be able to stand up to the setting. Much like Batman, with prep time the UNSC has a chance to stand tall, but without it they've got a pretty quick expiration date. This lets them not only catch up, but pick and choose their battles, and if they go undetected on a large enough scale for long enough, they can have a chance to fortify and make allies as need be. If things go well, by the time the factions of the galaxy at large learn a new empire of humans has suddenly cropped up, key planets in the UNSC could be fortified with enough mech batteries to drown an entire crusade fleet in. Marines armed with lasguns, coupled with ODSTs armed with plasma, and Spartans armed with Necron weapons in larger numbers than ever before can hold the line against the worst the galaxy has to offer. Humanity as a whole would still be under the yoke of the Imperium, but for the first time in 20,000 years the galaxy could see a subset of mankind not burdened by the superstition and paranoia of the Imperium of Man. This, in my mind, is easily the best case scenario for the UNSC. Able to fortify and expand its knowledge, it could become a solid faction in its own right. Of course, it's also pretty unlikely. Allowing the UNSC to grow wouldn't be in anyone's best interests, and this also assumes no one notices the empire of roughly 1,000 planets squatting in the corner for several decades at the absolute minimum. Although perhaps, even if worse comes to worst, over the course of a war, the UNSC will be able to study the tech of whoever's kicking the shit out of them, so maybe they'll be able to claw their way to being able to stalemate whoever tries to do them in. Remember, no one faction can afford to wipe out one of the other factions without all the remaining ones descending on them like a pack of rats, so the UNSC just has to hold on long enough to reach a roughly equal tech level. Far, far easier said than done, but not impossible. So that being said, let's move on to the next idea I came up with. The UNSC makes some friends. This could be a bit mixed with the other one as well, since making friends can happen at any point. But for the fun of it, let's say they have to make some friends straight away. They've got no time to prepare and gotta find allies fast. Who's gonna be their best shot? Well, let's get the obvious ones out of the way first. No Tyranids, Orcs, Chaos, or Dark Eldar. Maybe they'll be like the Tau were and try and make a deal out of naivety with the Dark Eldar, and then suddenly all of Mirror Reach is kidnapped and turned into a literal fleshlight. Maybe the occasional backroom deal with some orc freebooters, but nothing beyond that. Allying with the Imperium, like I said, doesn't strike me as particularly likely, because I imagine it'll either want to annex the UNSC outright or get rid of it. No middle ground. The UNSC has things like democracy and free thinking, and the Imperium doesn't like that, so it's either submit or get shot. But aside from those fellas, the UNSC could make some key allies depending on the situation. The Eldar probably wouldn't be their biggest fans, but they may see them at the very least as a faction worth talking to on occasion. The UNSC would certainly be willing to talk things out with them, and the Eldar could maybe make some deals. You stay away from this maiden world, we'll make sure the currents of the warp disrupt any fleets coming to kick your ass. That sort of thing. Doubtlessly, the Eldar will try and manipulate to them to some extent, so it's probably not going to be a perfect alliance. This is still the Eldar we're talking about, but a sort of uneasy peace could be had. The Necrons would be a bit more extreme. Some dynasties might just not give a shit. Some primitive empire popped up out of nowhere next to them. How quaint. Some will probably want to exterminate them, which would be very bad for the UNSC. But some might want some extra vassals, and a free human empire of decent size with new technology would be a great thing to have in your back pocket. The UNSC probably wouldn't be happy with this arrangement, but I'd bet they'd suck it up when the other option is complete extermination via Terminators. What's paying your robot overlord taxes every now and then compared to that? And this would benefit both factions if they can find a Necron dynasty willing to vassalize them. The UNSC gets some of the best protection you can get, and while the Necrons won't be sharing their technology very much, they'd probably be happy to throw the UNSC military whatever scraps are left after they obliterate some crusade force or Tau army or other. Meanwhile, the Necrons get things like slip space and armies of meatbags to soak up bullets for them. everybody wins. If nothing else, Trazyn alone would go nuts over them existing, so maybe he could help him out a bit. Him and Oni could work out a deal. Oni will kidnap some people for him to put in a museum, and he'll give him some museum pieces in return. It's not like they wouldn't agree to something like that. The Leagues of Votann might also take interest in the UNSC for a couple of reasons. The most basic, of course, being that the UNSC planets probably have some resources and stuff they want, and general trading and economic reasons means they probably won't come to blows. The Votann could do for the UNSC what they did for the Tau, vastly increasing their tech level in exchange for trading rights. Probably wouldn't be anything like annexation or vassalization going on, and there'd still undoubtedly be some conflict, but a couple of the kin might make alliances with the UNSC if it strikes their fancy. The Tau could perhaps be the best possible allies for the UNSC. Now I know what you're thinking. The Tau are the 40k version of the Covenant. They'd absolutely hate the Tau. Yeah, that could admittedly be a hurdle, but the thing is the UNSC isn't 40k levels of racist. The Kroot are probably uncomfortably similar to Jackals, same with the Vespid and drones, but beyond that, they're not the Covenant. While the average ODST was slinging around words like hingehead with every breath, there's also humans in it that were content to just move on from the Covenant War. Hell, there's an Oni agent in a trilogy of Halo books that's basically an elite fanboy. If push came to shove, the UNSC would be willing to ally with the Tau. If nothing else, the Tau themselves look fairly human, if blue and with forehead vaginas. Compare that to things like the Orcs or Tyranids, and yeah, I think I'd be willing to make friends with the Tau if I was in their footsteps. Besides, the UNSC was initially trying to make peace with the Covenant, and the first race they tried this with was the Brutes. If they can look at a Brute and decide that's a being worth opening peace talks with, they'll have no problem parlaying with the Tau. And yet if you were paying attention, you'll notice I said ally with the Tau, and here's why. For all the growing and advancement the Tau have done, they're still a pretty minuscule empire. The numbers I could find range from 100 to 1,000 worlds, and truthfully I'm of the opinion they're far closer to owning 100 than 1,000. A bit more than that, yeah, but not by much, so the UNSC is bigger than the Tau Empire by a decent bit, and while the Tau could probably take out the UNSC if it doesn't have a chance to grow, it'll be in the same way the Imperium could take out the Tau, at great cost and effort, and it'd probably just invite the other factions to swoop in while they're preoccupied. The Tau for the first time in the setting might be finally forced to approach an outside power as proper equals and as an ally, not either a species to be integrated or an enemy you sometimes fight alongside. Truth be told, I think that would not only be one of the best case scenarios for the UNSC, but it'd be even better for the Tau. Once the Ethereals soothe their egos and not being able to just quadruple their empire's size for zero effort, the Tau will have an ally with substantial industrial might. Trading and intelligence sharing between the two can get the UNSC up to snuff reasonably quickly, especially since unlike everyone else in the setting, the Tau don't operate on a timescale of millennia for their plans and projects. Imagine how hard it is for the Imperium to take out the Tau now, like I said before. Now imagine if the Tau have allies up to 8 times their size who they've gotten up to their tech level reasonably quickly. Expanding outward would still be incredibly difficult, but if the entire UNSC military is given even limited access to Tau tech, they'd turn that region of space into an unbreakable fortress. Imagine the Damocles Crusade if the Tau had 5 times the numbers of soldiers and their planets were surrounded by even more advanced Mac platforms. The Imperium wouldn't have cut their losses because of the Tyranids in that case, they would have just flat out lost. The Tau would also have the mother of all propaganda victories, and Oni would enjoy it as well. Plenty of Imperial worlds have willingly sided with the Tau, but among other reasons, the fear of getting exterminatus keeps most from outright joining them. Well, would you look at that? Now the Tau have human allies who don't care for all this Emperor nonsense and chose of their own volition to ally with the Tau. The Watercasts would have a field day with the sort of propaganda they can make from that. You could convince entire worlds to join this alliance because they wouldn't just be joining this weird Xenos race, they'd be joining the UNSC, their human compatriots. Oni, meanwhile, as an organization of humans, could use this to locate Imperial worlds showing signs of unrest and plant the seeds of rebellion. They talk about how great it is to live there, the planet revolts, then the Tau UNSC alliance sweeps in and gains another world. This would lead to plenty of conflict with the Imperium, and if they push it too far, they might just cause full-on crusades to be called and ruin a very good thing, but if played right, the Tau and UNSC could expand more than they ever could otherwise. Maybe far enough down the line, they'd merge and form one single civilization, braving the dangers of the galaxy together, but that's awfully noble bright for 40k. Between Oni, the Ethereals and their mind control, as well as the general shittiness of the galaxy, them being able to survive together is miraculous enough to think about already. And for the last scenario, the UNSC doesn't try and take territory or resist any invaders. They see the same writing on the wall as they did against the Covenant. They've got no shot against this clusterfuck of a galaxy. Time to pack up and leave. Instead of holding the line, they become a faction of nomads cruising the galaxy in massive ships, much like the Eldar. There's actually basis for this in canon. The Infinity was supposed to originally be the last refuge of humanity, a ship cruising throughout the stars that the Covenant couldn't reach. Ships like the Spirit of Fire were also colony ships retrofitted for the war effort, so the UNSC has experience with making something designed to ferry civilians into a weapon of war. How likely this scenario is to happen, I don't know. The UNSC built the Infinity as a last resort so humanity itself wouldn't go extinct. If it was the Imperium annexing them by force, for instance, they might just surrender and submit to their rule, so no Infinity-like ship. But if the Imperium is deemed UNSC ideals and ideas too far gone and heretical, or if something like the Tyranids is devouring their planets and it's time to get out of Dodge, it is possible. In this scenario, the UNSC invests resources into putting as much of its civilization into these massive ships like the Infinity as it possibly can. Existing ships could be retrofitted and new ones designed to support a population in all regards, from oxygen and food production to self-defense. After that, it's a matter of building enough of these to form self-sustaining fleets. The UNSC would hold onto the worlds it has for as long as possible, both for production and as a rallying point, but the nomadic lifestyle would take precedence. In this case, then, they just have to jump into slipspace at the first sign of a threat they can't handle and be off. Slipspace not being warp travel, it'll be a lot harder for the 40k factions to track it. Psychers who could read the future could do it, but there's not exactly a lot of those lying around, so on a day-to-day basis, that's not much of a problem. Their technology can be upgraded slowly over time as the UNSC picks and chooses where to land and where to fight. Making a beeline towards a planet like Terra would be a great way to commit mass suicide, but some outlying worlds could be traded with without the Imperium at large knowing the UNSC ever visited for centuries. The UNSC could fall into a very route pattern for the future going forward. They pop by for a quick visit, and at the worst, you threaten them and they go away. If not, they hang around for a bit, trade for some gubbins, and then head off. This could make them a lot of friends that otherwise they wouldn't be able to if they were still a normal faction. Space Marines and other forces in the Imperium that otherwise would be forced to fight them might be willing to look the other way when the UNSC comes around, since they're just going to vanish in a few weeks anyways, and beyond all other things, they're both human. Tau worlds under attack by hive fleets might find slipspace ruptures opening across the sky as Mac rounds and more burn their way through hive fleets before the UNSC withdraws and does it all over again. In exchange for supplies and technology, of course. Oni isn't going to let anyone get away without making a donation to the Spartan Pension Fund, after all. Naturally, the same thing applies to their enemies, too. Imperial Forge worlds producing supplies to fight the UNSC come under attack from Spartan teams who steal whatever valuable tech they can find before setting something on fire and leaving. Space stations on important worlds come under heavy assault, and then all the Imperium has to show for it is a fading portal to another dimension the Forward Unto Dawn slipped into making a getaway. Abaddon tasks some Chaos Lord to take down a UNSC task force, and then they decide they'd be much better off on the other side of the galaxy, and just refuse to play ball with Khorne's strongest glue eater. This scenario gives them the least staying power, but I think it could let them have the most impact on the galaxy. They could have all the planning of the Eldar without things like the fear of Slaanesh to hold them back from particularly risky battles, as well as the numbers to commit to a protracted campaign. If they're outright at war with the Imperium, entire sectors could revolt, as Oni propaganda shows that there's a faction of humanity that won't suffer Imperial rule, and neither should they. On the other hand, people like Gilliman might show the UNSC some degree of clemency in this case, and task forces between it and the Imperium instead coordinate to prevent chaos and more from getting any worse. After all, why fight this one group of humans who just want to be left alone when you can arm them and point them at something they too will surely realize is a threat that has to be dealt with? To wrap up, one final thing to consider. Overall, I believe I've shown how I think the UNSC's relations with the galaxy at large would be, but there's one group I haven't mentioned much.
Chaos.
Because for the first time in this little series of mine, Chaos is an actual genuine threat to the UNSC beyond the obvious problem of evil demons and evil super soldiers with big guns. The UNSC is human, through and through. Chaos loves humanity because of how easy they find it to corrupt, and that's certainly still the case with the UNSC here. Perhaps not quite as easy as it was during the Horus Heresy, since the UNSC doesn't have anything stupid like state-mandated atheism, but humanity in Halo isn't fundamentally different from 40k humanity. Their governments in history certainly are, but if you swapped a person from 40k and put him into Halo, he wouldn't melt from the sheer difference of it all or anything. The dude would probably just be happy he gets to eat food that isn't made from corpses. This means that just like in the Imperium, the desperate, decadent, deceiving, and destructive members of the UNSC may well turn to Chaos to find a route to greater power. Without making a specific scenario out of it, know that the UNSC always has the potential for something to go wrong, for someone important to fall to Chaos or accidentally summon a horde of demons. People just can't stop making deals with the devils of these settings, and while I think overall the UNSC would handle things better than the Imperium, that doesn't mean that some Oni operative or ODST who's lost his squad won't turn to the ruinous powers for a chance at something beyond mortal means. And who's to say someone like Tzeentch wouldn't cause the Imperium and UNSC to come to blows for his own unknowable plans? But with that, the final bit of the Halohammer series is done. For real this time, I won't be making any more of these. The UNSC ended up letting me get creative and put forth what I felt were some cool ideas, whereas the other factions in Halo would either be a repeat or I just can't find myself to care about them. How would the Banished fare? See the Covenant video, just with a bit more room for diplomacy. How would the Endless do? I don't care about the Endless. No one cares about the Endless. At least Halo 5 inspired some sort of emotion in people, even if that emotion was rage. This was, at the end of the day, more than anything, just an excuse for me to talk about Halo, because I'll talk about Halo until the sun stops shining. Future Halo stuff will be just Halo, no more Warhammer crossovers. Of course, it's easy to say that now, when I still have ideas in my head, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, yeah? Maybe Gilman will take a trip to the 2500s and I'll call it War Halo or something. Anyways, this seems like a good a time as any to say that I, for one, am afraid to announce I'm excited for the CE remake. My apologies, but I can't help it. It's a franchise I've put too much into to not have a bit of copium about. Although if you'll forgive me, I'd much rather cope about Halo being good than pretend to be excited for whatever's happening in 40k games I don't care about. I'm firing a localized Halo pulse at the next person who asks me to care about Skitarii. I can't do it, man.